My name is Sydney, and I am 34 years old. My dad called me at 3:30 in the morning crying from a police precinct. He told me my sister-in-law had just beaten him with a baseball bat, but she convinced the cops he was a violent, mentally ill old man who attacked her. My brother stood right there and let her lie. When I walked through the precinct doors, the desk sergeant took one look at my face, turned completely pale, and started stumbling over his apologies. He had no idea who he had just put in handcuffs. Before I share the rest of my story, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up and show your toxic family exactly how much power you truly hold. The harsh fluorescent lights of the Seattle Police Department precinct buzzed above my head as I pushed through the heavy glass doors. The air inside smelled of stale coffee and damp floor wax. I scanned the chaotic waiting area and my heart completely stopped. My father Thomas was sitting on a cold metal bench. He was 68 years old, wearing nothing but his thin cotton pajamas and a pair of mismatched slippers. A fresh, jagged cut marked the side of his forehead, and a trail of dried blood snaked down his cheek. But the most horrifying detail was the heavy steel handcuffs securing his right wrist to the metal bar of the bench. A few feet away from him stood my older brother Bradley. Bradley was wearing a designer cashmere sweater, looking perfectly groomed even at this hour. Clinging to his arm was his wife Monique. Monique is a stunning African-American woman who always made sure she looked like she just stepped off a runway. Tonight was no exception. Her elaborate box braids were pulled back flawlessly, and she was using her long manicured acrylic nails to dab at her eyes. She was putting on an absolute masterclass in theatrical crying for the two patrol officers standing in front of her. "He just snapped, officer!" Monique wailed, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. "Thomas has been losing his mind for months. He came out of his bedroom holding a weapon and came right at me. I thought he was going to kill me." Bradley wrapped his arm protectively around Monique and nodded in grave agreement. "My dad has severe dementia. We have been trying to manage it, but he has become incredibly violent. My wife was just defending herself." I marched straight toward them, the heels of my boots clicking loudly against the floor. Bradley turned his head at the sound. The moment he saw me, his mask of fake concern morphed into a scowl of pure disgust. "What are you doing here, Sydney?" Bradley snapped, stepping into my path to block me from reaching our father. "Who even called you?" "Dad called me," I replied, my voice dangerously low. "Why is he bleeding, Bradley? And why is he in handcuffs instead of an ambulance?" Bradley rolled his eyes and let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "Do not start your dramatic nonsense tonight, Sydney. Go back to your cheap studio apartment. You cannot afford to fix this. You cannot even afford to pay off your own student loans." His words were designed to cut, just as they always were. Bradley had been the undisputed golden child of our family for his entire life. Our parents had handed him a luxury car at 16, paid fully for his out-of-state university tuition, and handed him the down payment for his massive house in Bellevue. Meanwhile, I was the family disappointment who refused to study business. I had worked 3 awful jobs to put myself through law school. Bradley still viewed me as the broke, exhausted student who used to beg our parents for grocery money. He had no idea how drastically my life had changed because he had not bothered to speak to me in over a year. Monique peeked out from behind Bradley's shoulder. The fake tears instantly vanished, replaced by a vicious sneer. "Your father has finally lost his mind, Sydney. He attacked me in my own home. We are pressing charges and we are having him committed to a psychiatric ward. You are just a glorified paralegal. You have no power here." She shoved her arm forward, pointing to a tiny, barely visible red scratch near her elbow. "Look what that crazy old man did to me. The law is the law, and he belongs behind bars or in a padded cell." I ignored her completely and pushed past Bradley. I dropped to my knees in front of the metal bench. My father looked up at me, his eyes wide with absolute terror. He was shivering violently. "Sydney," he whispered, his voice cracking, "I am not crazy. I swear to you I am not crazy." "I know, Dad," I said softly, taking his free hand in mine. "Tell me exactly what happened." He swallowed hard, glancing nervously at Bradley. "I woke up to get a glass of water. I saw a flashlight beam coming from my study. When I walked in, Monique had the safe open. She was holding a blank check from my retirement account." I yelled at her to put it down. She picked up Bradley's baseball bat from the corner and swung it right at my head. My blood turned to absolute ice. "Where was Bradley?" I asked. "He came downstairs when he heard me fall," my dad sobbed quietly. "He looked at me bleeding on the carpet. Then he looked at Monique and he told her to call the police and say I went crazy." I stood up slowly. The anger inside me was no longer a hot, reckless flame. It was a cold, calculated weapon. I looked at Bradley, who was currently laughing with one of the patrol officers, acting like they were old friends at a country club. He was so confident in his privilege. He was so certain that his wealth and his charm would easily crush whatever pitiful defense his little sister could put up. I turned my back on my brother and walked directly toward the main booking desk. A young desk sergeant was sitting behind the high counter typing rapidly on his keyboard. His uniform name tag read, Dawson. I noticed a bright yellow form sitting on the counter right in front of him. It was a 5150 form, the official paperwork required to place someone under an involuntary psychiatric hold in the state of Washington. Dawson was currently filling out my father's name. "Excuse me, Officer Dawson," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the quiet precinct. Dawson did not even look up from his computer screen. "Step back behind the yellow line, ma'am. I am processing a violent suspect. If you are here to post bail for someone, you need to wait your turn." Bradley noticed me standing at the desk and let out a loud groan. He walked over, bringing Monique with him. "Officer, please excuse my sister," Bradley said smoothly, flashing his expensive watch as he leaned on the counter. "She thinks because she works as a low-level assistant at some law firm, she understands the legal system. She is highly emotional and has a history of making scenes. Just ignore her and finish the psychiatric hold paperwork for my father. I am his next of kin, and I authorize the transfer to the mental hospital." Monique crossed her arms and smirked at me. "Give it up, Sydney. The police have already taken my statement. They know your dad is a dangerous lunatic. You are embarrassing yourself." I did not look at Monique. I did not look at Bradley. I kept my eyes locked on Officer Dawson, waiting for him to finally look up from his screen. "Officer Dawson!" I repeated, my tone dropping to a level of absolute authority. "I suggest you put that pen down right now unless you want to spend the rest of your career directing traffic in a parking lot." Dawson finally stopped typing. He let out an annoyed sigh and raised his head, clearly prepared to deliver a harsh warning about interfering with police business. But the moment his eyes met mine, his entire demeanor changed. The annoyance vanished instantly. The color drained completely from his face, leaving him looking like he had just seen a ghost. He looked at me, then looked down at the 5150 form, then looked back at me, his mouth opening and closing without any sound coming out. "Are you deaf?" Officer Monique shrieked, slamming her manicured hand flat against the booking desk. She completely ignored the fact that Dawson looked like he was about to pass out. She thrust her right arm over the high counter, shoving it practically into his face. "I said I want this violent old man committed. Look at this." I stared at her arm. The injury she was displaying was a faint pink line barely an inch long. It looked more like a paper cut or a scrape from a luxury handbag clasp than the result of a vicious, life-threatening assault. Yet Monique cradled her arm as if it had been severed. "He tried to murder me in my own home," Monique sobbed, her voice echoing shrilly off the concrete walls. "He came at me like a wild animal. If Bradley had not run downstairs and tackled him, I would be dead right now. You need to finalize that psychiatric hold immediately before he kills someone else." Bradley stepped up right beside her, wrapping a comforting arm around her waist. He adjusted the cuffs of his expensive cashmere sweater and gave the desk sergeant a tight, deeply concerned smile. It was the exact same smile he used to charm investors before draining their bank accounts. "My wife is traumatized," Bradley stated, his tone dripping with fake exhaustion. "My father has been suffering from rapid-onset dementia for the past 12 months. We have tried everything to keep him comfortable at the house. We hired private nurses. We paid for the best specialists in the state. But tonight he completely lost touch with reality. He grabbed a baseball bat and started swinging it at Monique. I looked at my father. He was sitting on the metal bench, his hands shaking violently as they rested on his knees. Blood was still actively seeping from the gash on his forehead, staining the collar of his thin cotton pajamas. He looked so frail, so incredibly vulnerable. That is a lie, my dad whispered, his voice trembling so hard it broke. Bradley, please. Tell them the truth. I caught her stealing. She hit me. See, Bradley said loudly, pointing a firm finger at our dad. Listen to him. He is completely delusional. He thinks people are stealing from him. It is classic paranoia. The neurologist warned us this would happen. Bradley turned his attention fully back to Officer Dawson, projecting the image of a weary, responsible son bearing an impossible burden. I am his primary next of kin. Bradley continued smoothly. I make his medical decisions. I am officially requesting that you transfer him to the state psychiatric facility for a mandatory 72-hour hold. He is a clear and present danger to society. It was a brilliant, terrifying strategy. I knew exactly what my brother was trying to do. If they successfully locked my dad in a psychiatric ward under an involuntary hold, he would be legally declared incompetent. Bradley would automatically gain full control over my father's estate, his bank accounts, and his retirement funds. They would cash that stolen check by morning, and my father would spend the rest of his life heavily sedated in a locked facility. They had planned this perfectly, or so they thought. I took a step closer to the desk, positioning myself directly between Bradley and Officer Dawson. No one is transferring this man anywhere except a hospital emergency room to treat the head trauma your wife inflicted on him. Officer Dawson finally snapped out of his silent panic. He blinked hard, shaking his head slightly to regain his procedural authority. He looked at Bradley's expensive clothes, then at Monique's aggressive posture, and finally at me. I was wearing a plain tan trench coat pulled tightly over my clothes, and I still had my dark sunglasses perched on my face from the blinding rain outside. To him, I probably looked like a random hysterical civilian causing a disruption in his lobby. Ma'am, Dawson said, his voice dropping into a stern, authoritative register. I need you to step back behind the yellow line right now. This is a domestic dispute and a medical crisis. Unless you have legal guardianship over this man, you have no standing here. We are following standard operating procedure for a violent individual. Bradley let out a loud, triumphant breath. Exactly. Thank you, officer. My sister has no legal authority here. She does not even know what is going on. She has been completely absent from our father's life. Bradley shot me a look of pure venom, his upper lip curling into a sneer. You have not been around for a year, Sydney. You have been too busy struggling to pay rent on that dump you live in. You have no idea the burden I have carried taking care of his deteriorating mind while you were off playing student. You cannot afford to get involved in this. Monique let out a sharp, theatrical laugh. She crossed her arms, her heavy diamond bracelets clinking together. It is actually pathetic, she sneered, looking me up and down with intense disgust. You watched a few courtroom dramas, and now you think you can walk into a police precinct and give orders. What are you going to do, Sydney? File a motion. You are a glorified paralegal. Fetching coffee and organizing filing cabinets does not make you a lawyer. You have zero power here. So go back to your cheap little life and let the adults handle this. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream. I did not throw a tantrum the way Monique was doing. I did not need to. True power never has to shout to make itself heard in a room. Instead, I reached up and slowly pulled my dark sunglasses off my face. I folded the frames with a sharp click and slipped them into the pocket of my trench coat. I took one deliberate step forward, closing the distance until my chest was almost touching the edge of the high booking desk. I placed both of my hands flat on the scratched metal counter and leaned in, locking my eyes entirely on the desk sergeant. Officer Dawson. I said, my voice so dangerously quiet that the entire waiting area seemed to hold its breath. I want you to look very closely at my face. Dawson stared at my face. The irritation in his eyes held for a fraction of a second before recognition hit him like a physical blow. I had just spent the last 6 months plastered across local television screens, debate stages, and campaign billboards all over King County. I had won the election by a landslide. My face was currently on the cover of the Seattle Times legal section. I watched the blood rapidly drain from his cheeks. The arrogant posture of a precinct desk sergeant vanished entirely. He bumped his knees against his heavy wooden desk as he scrambled to his feet, knocking his rolling chair backward, until it hit a filing cabinet with a loud thud. He stood at rigid attention, his hands trembling slightly as they hovered over his keyboard. Madam District Attorney Dawson stammered, his voice cracking. "I am so sorry. I did not realize who you were." The silence in the waiting area was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the scuffed linoleum floor. Bradley let out a scoff of disbelief. He stepped forward, waving his hand dismissively at the officer. "What are you talking about, officer?" "District Attorney. This is my little sister Sydney. She is a low-level clerk who can barely pay her rent. You do not need to call her Madam anything. Just finish the psychiatric paperwork so I can take control of my father." Dawson did not even look at my brother. He kept his eyes locked firmly on me, visibly sweating now. He knew exactly what kind of trouble he had just stepped into. "Mr. Carter," Dawson said, his voice completely stripped of the friendly country club tone he had been using with Bradley earlier. "Your sister is the newly elected district attorney for King County. She is the top prosecutor in this jurisdiction." I turned my head slowly to look at my brother. The smug, confident smile had completely melted off his face. His jaw hung slightly open as his brain struggled to process the information. He looked me up and down, taking in my plain trench coat and simple boots, trying to reconcile the image of the struggling student he remembered with the woman holding absolute power in this room. They had not bothered to check on my life in so long that they completely missed my graduation, my rise through the prosecutor's office, and my recent election victory. Monique gripped Bradley's arm, her long acrylic nails digging into his expensive cashmere sweater. "Bradley, what is he talking about?" she hissed. "She is lying. She has to be lying." "I am not lying, Monique," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "And I am done letting you control the narrative in this room." I turned my attention back to the desk sergeant. "Officer Dawson," I said sharply, "where is the key to those handcuffs?" Dawson fumbled with his duty belt, his fingers shaking as he unclipped a small silver key. He hurried out from behind the booking desk and practically ran over to the metal bench where my father was sitting. Before he could insert the key into the lock, I held up my hand. "Wait right there," I commanded. "I want you to explain to me on the record exactly what police protocol justifies shackling a bleeding 68-year-old man to a metal bench without offering him immediate medical attention." Dawson froze the key hovering inches from my father's wrist. "Ma'am, we received a domestic disturbance call. The complainant stated she was attacked with a deadly weapon." I pointed at Monique. "The complainant has a paper cut on her arm. My father has an open head wound that is actively bleeding onto your precinct floor. Yet you detained the bleeding senior citizen and handed the uninjured party a cup of water. You bypassed a medical clearance entirely to start filling out an involuntary psychiatric hold based on the hearsay of an uninjured party. Is that the standard operating procedure for the Seattle Police Department? Or did my brother simply charm you into bypassing the law?" I did not wait for his excuse. I took a step closer, towering over his bowed posture. "Uncuff my father right now. Then you are going to call an ambulance to this precinct. If that ambulance is not pulling up to those front doors in exactly 5 minutes, my first official act as district attorney tomorrow morning will be opening a full internal affairs investigation into your badge number for elder endangerment and gross negligence." "Yes, ma'am. Right away, ma'am," Dawson said. He quickly unlocked the heavy steel cuff. My father let out a ragged breath, rubbing his bruised wrist. I knelt beside him, pulling a clean tissue from my pocket to gently press against the gash on his forehead. He looked at me with tears in his eyes, realizing for the first time that his daughter was no longer the helpless scapegoat of the family. I was the one holding the shield now. Bradley finally snapped out of his shocked paralysis. He marched toward us, his face red with a desperate, furious panic. "You cannot do this," Sydney Bradley yelled. "You cannot just walk in here and throw your weight around. I have a medical power of attorney. I am his primary caretaker. The law gives me the right to commit him for his own safety. You are abusing your political office to interfere in a civil family matter." I stood up and faced my brother. "You are out of your depth, Bradley. A power of attorney does not give you the right to bypass emergency medical care for a head trauma. And it certainly does not give you the right to lock a man in a psychiatric ward just because you want to drain his retirement accounts before sunrise. This is no longer a civil family matter. The moment your wife filed a false police report and swung a baseball bat at an elderly man, this became a criminal investigation. Monique realized the situation was entirely slipping out of their control. The police were no longer on their side. The desk sergeant was frantically speaking into his radio, calling for an emergency medical unit. The power dynamic she had relied on was completely destroyed. But Monique was not the type of person to ever back down gracefully. She shoved past Bradley, her face twisted into a mask of pure vicious entitlement. She pointed her finger right at my chest. "You think you are so smart, Sydney?" Monique snarled, her voice vibrating with rage. "You think because you won some local election, you can protect this crazy old man? Well, guess what? I am the victim here. He attacked me in my house, and I have my husband as an eyewitness. I am pressing formal assault and battery charges against your precious father. A district attorney cannot legally cover up a violent crime committed against an innocent woman. I will take this to the news. I will ruin your career before it even starts. See you in court, sweetheart." I did not even blink at Monique and her unhinged threats. Let her scream. Let her threaten my political career. I simply turned my back to her and guided the newly arrived paramedics straight to my father. Monique tried to step in front of the stretcher, waving her perfectly manicured hand with its microscopic scratch, demanding they treat her first. The lead paramedic took one look at my father, bleeding profusely from his temple, and completely bypassed her. Bradley shouted from the booking desk that he was the primary medical proxy, but the heavy ambulance doors slammed shut before he could finish his sentence, cutting off his arrogant voice entirely. The siren wailed as we sped through the dark, rain-soaked streets of Seattle. Inside the back of the ambulance, the harsh LED lights illuminated the deep purple bruising forming around my father's eyes. The paramedic gently cleaned the gash on his forehead, asking him standard questions to check his cognitive function. "What is your name? What year is it? Who is the current president?" My father answered every single question flawlessly. There was absolutely no sign of dementia, no trace of the cognitive decline Bradley and Monique had so desperately tried to sell to the police. He was just a terrified, heartbroken older man who had been brutally assaulted in the home he paid for. He reached out with a trembling, blood-stained hand and grabbed the sleeve of my trench coat. He pulled me close, ignoring the paramedic wrapping a thick bandage around his head. "I have to tell you the truth, Sydney," he whispered, his voice cracking with the weight of unshed tears. "They did not call the police because I went crazy. I caught them." I asked him what he meant, keeping my own voice steady and calm so he would feel safe. He squeezed my hand tighter. "I had just liquidated my primary retirement account," he explained, his chest heaving with silent sobs. "I noticed thousands of dollars missing over the last few months. Cash withdrawals I never authorized. Designer shopping charges I never made. I requested a cashier check for $300,000 so I could move my life savings to a completely new bank in the morning. I locked the check in my floor safe. I did not realize Monique was watching me from the hallway. My stomach turned to absolute ice as I listened. My father took a ragged breath and continued, "I could not sleep tonight. I went downstairs to the kitchen for a glass of water, and I saw the light on in the study. Monique had cracked the safe. She was standing there holding my retirement check, slipping it right into her designer handbag. I yelled at her to put it back. I told her I was calling the police. She did not even panic, Sydney. She just reached into the corner, grabbed the aluminum baseball bat Bradley keeps by the door, and swung it right at my head. The sickening crack of metal hitting bone echoed in his description. He fell to the hardwood floor, bleeding and disoriented. But it was not the physical blow that broke him. It was what happened next. Bradley ran downstairs. When he heard the crash, my father wept, the tears finally spilling over his wrinkled cheeks. He looked at me bleeding on the rug. Then he looked at Monique holding the bat and my check. I reached my hand out to my son. I asked him to help me. "Do you know what he did?" My father choked on a sob, his shoulders shaking violently. He told Monique to call 911 and tell them my dementia made me violent. He told her to say I attacked her. He just watched me bleed, Sydney. He watched me bleed so he could cash my check in the morning. The depth of the betrayal hung heavy in the sterile air of the ambulance. My father looked up at me, his eyes filled with a lifetime of agonizing regret. I bought him that house, he cried, his voice laced with pure shame. I paid for his elite business degree while you worked night shifts at a diner to pay for your own law school books. I funded his luxury wedding. I gave him everything because he was my golden boy, and I told you that you needed to learn how to struggle. I am so sorry, Sydney. I was so blind. I gave everything to a son who stepped over my bleeding body for a paycheck, and I pushed away the daughter who just rushed into a police station at 3 in the morning to save my life. I did not offer him empty platitudes. I did not tell him it was fine because it was not fine. I had spent my entire life being treated like a second-class citizen in my own family, constantly passed over for a brother who never worked an honest day in his life. But seeing the man who raised me shattered and bleeding changed the dynamic entirely. I tightened my grip on his hand, looking him dead in the eye. "You are safe now, Dad," I told him, my tone laced with absolute terrifying conviction. "They thought they could use your money to fund their fake luxury lifestyle. But I promise you, by the time I am done with them, they will not even have pennies left to pay for a public defender. I am going to tear their lives apart brick by brick." The ambulance lurched slightly as it turned sharply, hitting the steep incline of the emergency ramp at Seattle General Hospital. The siren finally cut off, leaving only the heavy sound of the rain battering the roof of the vehicle. The paramedic quickly unbuckled the stretcher, preparing to roll my father straight into the trauma bay. The heavy back doors swung open to the damp, freezing night air. But before the paramedic could even lower the wheels of the gurney, the deafening screech of tires echoed through the ambulance bay. A sleek black Mercedes AMG aggressively cut across the emergency lane, illegally blocking the ambulance doors. The driver's side door flew open and Bradley stepped out into the pouring rain. He was clutching a thick legal folder, his face twisted in absolute fury. Right behind him stepped a tall, imposing man in a sharp, expensive suit. The heavy sliding doors of the emergency room flew open automatically as the paramedics rushed the gurney inside. The chaotic noise of the hospital trauma center washed over us. Machines beeped frantically. Nurses shouted orders across the triage desk. I stayed right beside my father, keeping a firm grip on his shoulder as they wheeled him into Trauma Bay 4. A young attending physician immediately stepped up to the gurney, shining a penlight into my father's eyes to check his pupil dilation. Before the doctor could even ask his first medical question, the curtain to our trauma bay was violently yanked aside. Bradley barged into the sterile room, completely ignoring the protesting triage nurses trailing behind him. His expensive leather shoes squeaked against the sanitized linoleum floor. Right beside him was the tall man from the Mercedes. He wore a custom-tailored suit that probably cost more than my first car. His silver hair was slicked back and he carried a thick leather briefcase. He moved with the predatory confidence of a man who was used to destroying people for a living. "Excuse me," the attending physician said sharply, stepping between his patient and the two intruders. "You cannot be in here. This is an active trauma bay. I need you to step out immediately." "We are not going anywhere," Bradley announced, puffing out his chest. "I am this man's primary next of kin. I am his son, and he is currently experiencing a severe violent psychotic break." The man in the suit stepped forward smoothly, pulling a crisp, heavily stamped document from his briefcase. He shoved it directly into my face before handing it to the attending physician. "My name is Gregory Pierce," the man said, his voice deep and dripping with arrogant authority. "I am the managing partner at Pierce & Associates, and I represent Mr. Bradley Carter. You are currently treating his father, Thomas Carter. The document I just handed you is a fully executed, legally binding medical power of attorney. My client has absolute unilateral authority over all medical and psychiatric decisions regarding this patient." I glanced at the paper in the doctor's hands. It was indeed a power of attorney form signed by my father over a year ago when he underwent a minor knee surgery and needed Bradley to sign his discharge papers. It was a standard precaution that Bradley was now weaponizing to orchestrate a kidnapping. My father saw Bradley standing at the foot of his bed and began to shake. The heart monitor attached to his finger started beeping rapidly, the tempo matching his sudden surge of absolute terror. "Get him out of here," my father gasped, trying to sit up on the gurney. "He let her hit me. He wants to lock me away. Please, doctor, do not listen to him. Listen." Bradley let out a heavy, exaggerated sigh. He looked at the doctor with an expression of deep manufactured sorrow. "Do you see what I am dealing with, doctor? My father has advanced dementia. He is completely delusional. He woke up an hour ago, grabbed a weapon, and violently attacked my wife in our home. He thinks everyone is trying to steal from him." The police were already processing his psychiatric hold when my estranged sister here decided to interfere and drag him to the hospital. I stepped right into Bradley's personal space, forcing him to take a half step backward. "Do not listen to a single word he says," I told the physician firmly. "My father is not suffering from dementia. He is the victim of a felony assault. His daughter-in-law struck him in the head with an aluminum baseball bat when he caught her embezzling his retirement funds. My brother is an accessory to the crime, and they are trying to silence the only witness." Gregory Pierce let out a condescending chuckle. He adjusted his expensive silk tie and looked at me as if I were a piece of dirt on his shoe. "Dr. Gregory," said smoothly, completely ignoring my statement. "As medical professionals, I know you understand the severe liability of ignoring a legally binding power of attorney. My client is officially instructing you to halt all standard medical treatment. The patient is a danger to himself and others. We demand that you immediately administer a heavy chemical sedative. Once he is stabilized, we have already arranged for private transport to the secure psychiatric wing at Cedar Pines facility." "You will do no such thing!" I countered, my voice raising enough to cut through the noise of the emergency room. A power of attorney does not give a family member the right to deny emergency medical care for a traumatic brain injury, and it certainly does not grant them the authority to order chemical restraints to facilitate an involuntary commitment. Gregory narrowed his eyes at me, his predatory smile fading into a sharp scowl. "Listen to me very carefully, little girl," Gregory sneered, stepping so close I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. "You might have watched a few true crime documentaries, but you do not know the law. This document holds up in any court in the state. If this hospital denies my client's legal directive, I will personally sue this facility, the attending physician, and the nursing staff for gross medical malpractice. I will make sure everyone in this room loses their medical license by Friday morning." The threat hung heavy in the air. I looked at the attending physician. He was young, probably just a few years out of his residency. He looked at the legal document in his hands, then looked at Gregory Pierce's intimidating stance, and finally at my father, who was now hyperventilating on the gurney. The fear of a massive lawsuit from a high-powered corporate attorney was visibly paralyzing him. Hospital administrators train doctors to fear litigation above almost everything else. Bradley sensed the doctor's hesitation and immediately capitalized on it. "Look at him," Dr. Bradley urged, pointing at my father's shaking hands and elevated heart rate on the monitor. "He is having a manic episode. He is going to hurt himself or one of your nurses if you do not calm him down right now. I am giving you legal authorization. Do your job and sedate him." "Doctor, do not do this," I warned, my tone hardening. "If you inject him with a sedative based on a fraudulent claim, you are participating in elder abuse. I am telling you he is fully lucid." But Gregory Pierce slammed his hand against the metal tray table next to the bed. "I am done playing games with a hysterical family member. Doctor, my client has the legal right to dictate care. Sedate the patient immediately, or I will be calling the hospital board of directors to demand your immediate termination." The young doctor swallowed hard. The pressure of the legal threats combined with the chaotic environment of the emergency room, and my father's genuine panic proved to be too much. He crumbled under the weight of Gregory's intimidation. The doctor turned away from me and looked at the triage nurse standing silently in the corner of the trauma bay. "Nurse," the doctor said, his voice tight with reluctance. "Prepare 5 milligrams of haloperidol and 2 milligrams of lorazepam. We need to chemically restrain the patient for his own safety before we can properly assess the head wound." Yes, doctor, the nurse replied quietly. She moved to the medication cart, her hands quickly snapping a sterile syringe out of its plastic packaging. She reached for the small glass vials of powerful antipsychotic sedatives. My father grabbed my arm, his fingers digging painfully into my skin. "Sydney, please," he sobbed, tears streaming freely down his bruised face. "If they put me to sleep, I will never wake up. Bradley will lock me away forever. Please do not let them take me." Bradley crossed his arms over his chest and smiled at me. It was a cold, victorious smirk. "You really thought you could win, Sydney. You always were a pathetic loser. Say goodbye to Dad." The nurse turned around, holding the needle upright, tapping the side of the plastic barrel to clear the air bubbles. She took a step toward my father's IV line. I threw my body directly between the nurse and my father's hospital bed. My shoulders slammed hard against the metal IV pole, sending the saline bag spinning wildly away from the gurney. I reached out and grabbed the nurse's wrist. I did not squeeze hard enough to hurt her, but my grip was like a vice of pure iron, completely halting her forward momentum. The needle hovered just inches from my father's arm. "Put that syringe down right now," I ordered, my voice cutting through the chaotic noise of the emergency room like a whip. "If you push that plunger into his vein without his consent, I will personally charge you with medical battery and aggravated assault." The young triage nurse gasped and immediately ripped her arm back. She looked at the syringe in her hand as if it had suddenly caught fire. She took 3 rapid steps backward, putting as much distance as possible between herself and the IV line. Gregory Pierce let out a roar of absolute fury. His expensive, calm demeanor completely shattered. He lunged forward, his face turning an ugly mottled shade of red. He pointed a trembling finger at my face, shouting that I was actively interfering with a binding medical directive. Before he could finish his aggressive rant, I reached out and ripped the thick power of attorney document right out of his manicured hands. He gasped in shock and tried to snatch the heavy paper back. I easily sidestepped his clumsy grasp, holding the document up to the harsh fluorescent light. I did not even need to read the entire packet. I flipped directly to the 3rd page, running my finger down to the medical proxy execution clause. I had spent years dissecting fraudulent contracts in the prosecutor's office, and I knew exactly what to look for. "Doctor," I said, turning my gaze to the terrified attending physician, "I want you to listen to me very carefully before you end your medical career tonight. My brother is trying to convince you that this piece of paper gives him the right to drug and commit my father against his will. But let us look at the actual law. Under Washington state legislation, for a proxy to enact involuntary psychiatric commitment based on rapid cognitive decline, the incapacitated status must be verified and signed by 2 independent medical professionals." I held the document right in front of the young doctor's face and tapped the empty signature lines at the bottom of the page. One of those signatures must belong to the patient's primary care provider. I continued, my voice ringing with absolute legal authority. The second signature must belong to a board-certified psychiatrist who has conducted a full cognitive evaluation. I do not see any signatures here. I see a blank page. "Tell me, doctor, are you a board-certified psychiatrist?" The attending physician swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. "No, ma'am," he replied, his voice barely a whisper. "I am an emergency medicine attending." "Then you have absolutely no legal cover to inject my father with antipsychotics," I stated flatly. "If you do what this lawyer tells you, you are operating entirely outside the bounds of this document. You will be held personally and criminally liable." Gregory Pierce slammed his heavy leather briefcase onto the metal supply cart. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the small trauma bay. He adjusted his suit jacket, his eyes burning with predatory malice. "You are playing a very dangerous game, little girl," Gregory snarled, dropping all pretense of professional courtesy. "I know exactly who you are. I know you just won the district attorney election, but throwing your political weight around to override a civil family contract is a gross abuse of power. If you do not back down right now, I will file a formal grievance with the Washington State Bar Association before the sun comes up. I will have you investigated by the Ethics Committee. I will have you disbarred and removed from office before you even finish your first month." I did not back away from him. I closed the distance between us until I was standing less than a foot away from his chest. I looked up into his furious eyes and let out a cold, chilling laugh. "Are you threatening my law license, Gregory?" I asked softly. That is a bold move for a man who is currently standing in a trauma bay, aiding and abetting elder financial exploitation. Gregory scoffed, crossing his arms over his chest. "You have no proof of anything. You are just a hysterical daughter throwing baseless accusations." "Let us talk about the penal code," I said, maintaining unblinking eye contact. Washington, Revised Code. Chapter 9. A Point 56. Conspiracy to commit fraud and elder abuse. My father was brought in here with blunt force trauma to the head. He was struck with a baseball bat by his daughter-in-law after catching her stealing a $300,000 retirement check. My brother is an accessory after the fact, and you, Gregory, rushed down here at 4 in the morning to try and force a doctor to chemically restrain the victim so he cannot testify to the police. I leaned in closer, dropping my voice to a lethal whisper. "If you push this any further, I will not just take your law license, I will instruct my fraud division to raid your fancy downtown office. I will seize your hard drives, audit every single estate account you manage, and put you in federal prison for racketeering. Do you really want to risk your entire life for a failing investment broker who cannot even afford to pay your retainer fee?" Gregory stared at me. The arrogant fire in his eyes flickered and died, replaced by cold, calculating self-preservation. He was a shark, and sharks knew when there was blood in the water. He realized instantly that I was not bluffing. I had the power, the motive, and the legal knowledge to utterly destroy him. Gregory slowly reached out and pulled the power of attorney document from my hand. He folded it neatly and tucked it back into his expensive briefcase. He turned to my brother without a single word of apology. "We are leaving," Bradley Gregory stated coldly. "This is no longer a viable legal strategy. You are on your own." Gregory marched out of the trauma bay, the heavy curtains swishing shut behind him. The attending physician let out a massive sigh of relief. He immediately turned to the triage nurse. "Discard the syringe," the doctor ordered quickly. "We are canceling the sedative. Page the neurology team to get down here for a head CT and let us get this wound cleaned up properly." The nurse practically sprinted to the disposal bin, dropping the loaded syringe inside with a loud clatter. My father slumped back onto his pillows, letting out a heavy, shaking breath of pure relief. He reached out and grabbed my hand, squeezing it with all the strength he had left. Bradley stood alone at the foot of the hospital bed. His high-priced lawyer had abandoned him. His plan to silence our father had failed spectacularly. He looked at the doctor, then at our father, and finally at me, his handsome face twisted into a mask of bitter, ugly hatred. He smoothed down the front of his cashmere sweater, refusing to accept total defeat. "You think you are so smart? Sydney." Bradley sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "You think because you scared off my lawyer you actually won tonight? Go ahead and play the hero. Enjoy your homeless dad. I am taking over his estate tomorrow morning." I watched the heavy privacy curtains sway as Gregory marched out of the trauma bay. My brother was left standing completely alone at the foot of the hospital bed. His expensive legal shield had just evaporated in front of his eyes. The attending physician and the nurses immediately sprang into action, rolling my father toward the imaging department for his CT scan. I stepped back to give the medical team room to work, keeping my eyes locked on Bradley. Most people would have backed down after watching their high-priced attorney run away in terror. But Bradley had spent 37 years living in a protective bubble of absolute delusion. He had never faced a single real consequence in his entire life. Instead of showing remorse, his handsome features twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated malice. He smoothed the front of his cashmere sweater, jutting his chin out as he closed the distance between us. "You really think you won tonight, Sydney?" Bradley sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "You think because you threw some legal jargon around and scared off Pierce that you actually saved him? You are just as pathetic as you were when you left home." I crossed my arms over my trench coat and stared at him. "Go ahead, Bradley," I said evenly. "Tell me exactly how you plan to spin this. Bradley let out a harsh barking laugh that echoed in the now empty trauma bay. I do not have to spin anything he said stepping into my personal space. I am going to let you take Dad. In fact, I insist you take him. Take him to your cramped, miserable little studio apartment, because as of right now, he is officially homeless. I raised an eyebrow, letting him dig his own grave. He lives in my house, Sydney, Bradley boasted, pointing a firm finger at his own chest. That massive estate in Bellevue belongs to me. My name is on the front door. My name is on the security system. By the time the sun comes up, I am having the locks changed and the gate codes wiped. If that old man tries to step foot on my property, I will have him arrested for trespassing. Bradley began pacing, waving his hands as his arrogant confidence surged back. And since it is my house, everything inside it belongs to me. The vintage car in the garage, the art collection on the walls, and most importantly, that heavy steel floor safe in the study. Monique is probably cracking it open right now. I am keeping his money, Sydney. All of it. He owes it to me for putting up with him. You can have the bleeding old man, but I am keeping the estate. His sheer entitlement was staggering. He was openly admitting his plan to rob an elderly assault victim, entirely convinced that his status shielded him from the law. You are openly confessing to financial theft, I reminded him calmly. It is not theft when you are the rightful heir. Bradley snapped back, his face turning an ugly shade of red. Mom and Dad always knew who the real winner in this family was. They knew I was the only one destined for greatness. That is why they bought me that Bellevue mansion the day I graduated with my business degree. They dropped over $1 million in cash to hand me a luxury estate because I deserved it. Bradley leaned in closer, a cruel, mocking gleam in his eyes. He wanted to hurt me. He wanted to drag me back to the days when I was nothing but a punching bag. Do you remember that, Sydney? Bradley whispered viciously. Do you remember when Mom and Dad handed me the keys to a mansion while you were drowning in 6 figures of student loan debt? You were eating instant noodles, crying at the kitchen table, begging them for a $500 loan just so you could buy your law school textbooks. And what did Dad tell you? He told you to get a third job. He told you that you needed to learn how to struggle. They gave me a kingdom, and they threw you out to the wolves. He laughed again, a sound completely devoid of any empathy. So do not stand here and act like you hold any power over me. They chose me. They bought that house for me. It is my territory, and I am going to squeeze every last dime out of his safe before I throw his remaining garbage onto the street. You are still just the broke, unwanted loser of this family. I stood perfectly still and let his words wash over me. 10 years ago, that speech would have crushed me. It would have sent me running to the nearest bathroom to cry until I could not breathe. I had spent my entire youth internalizing their rejection, believing that I was fundamentally unworthy of love or support. But I was not that scared broke girl anymore. I was a grown woman who had clawed her way to the very top of the legal food chain through pure, relentless grit. I looked at Bradley's expensive designer clothes and his perfectly styled hair. I did not see a successful businessman. I saw a hollow, failing fraud who was so desperate for cash that he had to beat his own father to steal a retirement check. Bradley stopped pacing. He stared at me, clearly confused by my total lack of reaction. He had expected me to scream, to cry, or to beg him to let our father come home. He expected me to shatter. Are you done? I asked softly. Bradley frowned, his arrogant posture faltering for a fraction of a second. What? I took a slow, deliberate step forward. I did not raise my voice, but the sudden drop in the room's temperature was palpable. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face. It was the kind of smile that made seasoned defense attorneys sweat in the courtroom. You love talking about that Bellevue estate, Bradley, I said, maintaining absolute, terrifying eye contact. You love bragging about the luxury house you think makes you a king. But before you go changing the locks and claiming everything inside, I tilted my head, my smile widening into something predatory. Are you sure you want to talk about who owns that house? Bradley's face went completely blank. His mouth hung open, but no words came out. He had always been so sure of his absolute ownership over everything in his life, and my question struck a nerve he did not even know he had. Before he could recover his arrogant composure and formulate a response, I turned my back on him entirely. I had no time to stand in a trauma bay trading insults with a failing investment broker. The clock was ticking. I walked directly to the attending physician who was still standing near the doorway. I pulled a business card from my pocket and handed it to him. "Doctor," I said, making sure my voice carried clearly over the noise of the emergency room. "My father is the victim of a violent felony. As of this exact moment, I am placing him under a strict protective hold. No one is allowed in his room without my explicit written authorization. Not my brother, not his wife, and certainly not any lawyers. If anyone tries to bypass hospital security to reach him, you call the precinct directly and tell them the district attorney requires immediate backup." The doctor nodded vigorously, gripping my business card like a shield. "Understood completely, ma'am. We will transfer him to a secure recovery floor right after his scan." I spun around and marched toward the exit. Bradley finally snapped out of his shock and lunged forward, trying to grab my arm. "You cannot just lock me out of my own father's hospital room," Bradley shouted, his face turning an ugly shade of purple. "I am going to call the police. I am going to tell them you are kidnapping him." I did not even break my stride. I shoved through the heavy double doors of the emergency room and looked back at him over my shoulder. "Go ahead and call them, Bradley," I replied coldly. "Tell them exactly what you did tonight. I am sure Officer Dawson would love to hear from you again." The sliding doors snapped shut, cutting off his furious screaming. I sprinted through the freezing Seattle rain toward my car. The icy downpour soaked right through my trench coat, but I barely felt it. My mind was racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Monique was currently alone in that massive Bellevue estate. If she had an ounce of self-preservation left in her body, she would be ripping through my father's study looking for the physical bank ledgers. She needed to destroy the paper trail that proved she was embezzling his retirement funds before the assault took place. If I lost those physical documents, prosecuting her for elder financial exploitation would become a massive headache. I threw myself into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and jammed my foot onto the gas pedal. The tires screeched against the wet pavement as I sped out of the hospital parking lot, heading straight for the floating bridge toward Bellevue. I connected my phone to the car's Bluetooth and dialed my chief investigator. The dashboard clock glowed brightly. It was barely 4:45 in the morning. He answered on the second ring, his voice gruff with sleep. "Hughes, I need you wide awake right now," I ordered, keeping my eyes locked on the rain-slicked highway ahead. "I have an active felony assault and elder abuse case unfolding. I need you to wake up the county clerk immediately." "Boss, it is not even dawn." Hughes grumbled, the sound of rustling sheets coming through the speakers. "The records office does not open for another 4 hours. "I do not care if you have to drive to the clerk's house and drag him out of bed yourself," I snapped, whipping my car into the fast lane. "I need the certified master deed for the property located at 4150 Lakeview Drive in Bellevue. I need the transfer records from exactly 5 years ago. Look for a Delaware holding company registered under the name Apex Financial LLC. I need the digital certified copies sent to my phone in the next 10 minutes, and I need you to print the physical copies and bring them to my office by sunrise." Hughes was suddenly wide awake. "Apex Financial. Wait, isn't that the blind trust you set up right after you passed the bar exam?" "Exactly," I confirmed, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The memory played vividly in my mind as the windshield wipers fought against the torrential rain. 5 years ago, Bradley had completely bankrupted himself trying to maintain the illusion of a billionaire lifestyle. He had maxed out every credit line and taken out massive secondary mortgages on the Bellevue mansion our parents had bought for him. He was literally days away from foreclosure. My father had come to me crying, begging me to use my legal knowledge to stall the bank so his golden boy would not end up sleeping on the streets. I did not stall the bank. I took the small inheritance my grandmother had left me, combined it with a massive commercial loan I secured entirely on my own merit, and I bought the debt. I structured it through an anonymous LLC, so Bradley would never know his despised little sister was the one saving his skin. He was so desperate for a bailout and so incredibly lazy that he signed the restructuring paperwork without ever reading the fine print. He thought a random private equity firm had bailed him out. He had absolutely no idea that he had sold 100% of the home's equity to me. He had been nothing but a glorified tenant paying me rent for 5 years. "Consider it done," Boss Hughes said, his fingers already clacking rapidly on a keyboard in the background. "I am pulling the digital file from the county database now." "What is the play here?" "The play is a summary eviction," I stated coldly. "Bradley and his wife are currently 4 months behind on their rent to my LLC. They just put my father in the hospital to steal his retirement check. I am going to legally throw them onto the street before breakfast. Send me those files." I hung up the phone just as I crossed the city limits into Bellevue. The storm was raging, the wind howling through the massive evergreen trees lining the wealthy suburban streets. I turned onto the private gated driveway of the estate. I expected to find the house completely dark. I expected to find Monique frantically shredding documents in the study, packing her designer bags to flee the state before the police caught up to her. Instead, as my headlights swept across the sprawling multi-million-dollar property, I slammed on my brakes in pure disbelief. The house was entirely lit up, blazing with light from every single window. The deafening heavy bass of club music vibrated right through the floorboards of my car. The manicured front lawn was completely destroyed, currently serving as a makeshift parking lot for at least a dozen luxury cars. Monique was not packing her bags. She was not trying to hide the evidence of her vicious crime. Believing she had successfully gotten away with locking my father in a psych ward and securing his $300,000 check, my sister-in-law was throwing a massive celebration party. The rain lashed against my windshield as I sat in the driveway of the Bellevue estate. The sheer audacity of the scene playing out before me made my blood boil. It was 5 in the morning. A massive winter storm was raging across Seattle. My father was lying in a hospital bed with a traumatic head wound. Yet here was Monique throwing a lavish party with a dozen luxury cars parked haphazardly across the manicured front lawn. The heavy bass of club music vibrated right through the floorboards of my car. She was celebrating her perceived victory. She thought she had won. She thought the $300,000 check locked in the study safe was already hers. I pushed open my car door and stepped out into the freezing storm. I did not bother pulling my trench coat tight. The freezing rain soaking through my clothes was nothing compared to the ice running through my veins. I marched up the grand stone steps to the front entrance. The massive mahogany double doors were left slightly ajar, spilling warm yellow light and the stench of cheap marijuana into the damp morning air. I planted my boot flat against the wood and shoved the doors wide open. The sight inside made my stomach turn. The grand foyer, a space my father had kept impeccably clean for years, was completely trashed. Muddy footprints tracked across the imported Persian rugs. Empty bottles of my father's prized vintage wine bottles he had been saving for special occasions were scattered across the Italian leather sofas. Random people I had never seen before were lounging on the expensive furniture, laughing and spilling drinks onto the hardwood floors. Monique was standing by the sweeping grand staircase. She was holding a crystal champagne flute surrounded by 3 of her friends. She was wearing a stunning designer silk dress, her long braids cascading over her shoulders. When she saw me standing in the foyer dripping wet and glaring at her, the triumphant smile vanished from her face. She slammed her glass down on the banister and marched straight toward me. "What the hell are you doing here?" Sydney Monique shouted over the blaring music. She waved her hand aggressively at someone near the sound system. "Turn that down right now." The heavy bass cut out abruptly, leaving an uncomfortable silence in the massive room. Her party guests turned their heads, staring at the soaking wet woman in a trench coat who had just crashed their morning celebration. "I am here to collect my father's personal belongings," I stated, my voice echoing clearly across the foyer. "And I am here to secure the floor safe in the study before you manage to figure out the combination." Monique let out a loud, theatrical laugh. She looked back at her friends, shaking her head as if I were the most pathetic creature she had ever seen in her life. "Did you hear that?" Monique asked the room, gesturing wildly at me. "The little paralegal thinks she can just walk into my house and make demands. Your father is a violent lunatic, Sydney. Bradley is finalizing his psychiatric hold at the hospital right now. That safe and everything in it belongs to my husband. Bradley ran away from the hospital an hour ago, I replied coldly, maintaining my position just inside the doorway. His lawyer abandoned him the second I threatened to have him disbarred for elder fraud. The involuntary hold was cancelled. My father is under a protective medical watch, and the police have a full report of your unprovoked assault. You are out of time, Monique. Pack your designer bags and get out of this house. Monique did not look scared. Instead, she took a deliberate step closer to me, her eyes flashing with pure malice. You want to collect his belongings? She asked, a cruel smile stretching across her face. You are a little late for that. I decided I needed more space for my new walk-in shoe closet. I had my friends drag every single piece of garbage your father owned out to the industrial dumpster in the alley. His clothes, his boring books, those stupid photo albums of you and your dead mother, they are sitting in the rain right now. The urge to physically strike her was overwhelming. The thought of my mother's photographs, the only remaining pictures my father had kept of her ruined in a wet dumpster, made my vision blur with pure rage. But I refused to lose control. Losing control was exactly what she wanted. I took a slow, deep breath, locking my emotions behind a wall of titanium discipline. I was a prosecutor. I operated on facts and law, not emotion. You have exactly 3 minutes to hand over the physical bank ledgers from the study, I ordered, lowering my voice to a lethal whisper. If you do not give them to me right now, I will add destruction of evidence to your list of felony charges. Monique rolled her eyes heavily. You really love throwing around fake legal threats, do you not? She sneered. Well, let me show you a real legal threat. She snapped her fingers at one of her friends hovering nearby. Hand me that folder. Her friend hurried over and handed Monique a manila envelope. Monique pulled out a crisp white document bearing the official blue seal of the King County Superior Court. She shoved the paper directly into my chest. I grabbed it, my eyes quickly scanning the legal text. It was a temporary restraining order. I called a judge we know who owes Bradley a favor, Monique bragged, crossing her arms in absolute triumph. He signed an emergency order at 4 a.m. based on my statement. It officially bars your violent, crazy father from coming within 500 feet of this property. And because you are his hostile accomplice, your name is on that list too. You are legally barred from this estate, Sydney. You are currently trespassing in my home. I looked at the signature at the bottom of the page. It was a real signature from a night court judge who clearly rubber-stamped emergency orders without verifying the details. In the eyes of the patrol officers who would respond to this address, the document was entirely valid. Monique pulled her smartphone from her pocket and proudly dialed 911. Her friends pulled out their own phones, holding them up to record me giggling as they prepared to film my ultimate humiliation. They wanted to capture the moment the poor, struggling sister was dragged out of the mansion in handcuffs. Yes, emergency, Monique said into her phone, maintaining unblinking, victorious eye contact with me. I have an intruder in my house who is actively violating a court-ordered restraining order. Send the police immediately. I want her arrested. Monique ended the call with a sharp tap of her manicured finger against the screen. She slipped the phone into her designer pocket and crossed her arms, her chest heaving with triumphant breaths. Her 3 friends immediately circled around me like a pack of starving hyenas. They shoved their camera lenses just inches from my face, their camera flashes blinding in the dim foyer. They were giggling and whispering to each other, narrating the scene for their social media followers. Look at the disgraced prosecutor, one of the friends sneered, pushing her phone closer to my wet hair. She looks like a drowned rat. I cannot wait to post the video of her getting dragged out of here in handcuffs. Monique stepped forward, a vicious smirk playing on her lips. You really thought you could just barge in here and intimidate me, Sydney. You thought that DA badge made you untouchable. The police are going to be here in less than 5 minutes. When they see this signed judge order, you are going straight into the back of a squad car. You are going to lose your law license, your new job, and your freedom all before the sun even comes up. I looked at the group of women surrounding me. I looked at the muddy footprints ruining my father's Persian rugs and the half-empty bottles of vintage wine stinking up the room. Any normal person would have panicked. Any normal person staring down an active restraining order and an incoming police raid would have turned around and sprinted out the front door into the freezing rain. I did not run. I did not even flinch. Instead, I unbuttoned my soaking wet trench coat, peeled it off my shoulders, and tossed it carelessly over the banister of the grand staircase. I smoothed down my blouse, adjusted my posture, and walked directly past Monique and her pack of recording friends. I strolled down the wide hallway and headed straight for the massive custom-built chef kitchen at the back of the estate. "What are you doing?" Monique demanded, her triumphant tone faltering for a split second as she scrambled to follow me. "Get back here. You are not allowed to wander around my house." I ignored her completely. I stepped into the gleaming kitchen, my boots squeaking slightly on the imported marble tiles. I walked over to the built-in espresso machine, nestled between the double ovens and the sub-zero refrigerator. My father loved this espresso machine. He used to make me a latte every time I came over to help him review his estate planning documents before Bradley isolated him. I grabbed a ceramic mug from the open shelving, popped in a fresh coffee pod, and pressed the brew button. The machine whirred to life, the rich aroma of dark roast coffee filling the tense air. "Are you actually insane?" Monique shouted, stopping at the kitchen island. She slammed her hands down on the marble countertop. "I just called the cops on you. You are about to be arrested for violating a court order, and you are making yourself a cup of coffee." I leaned against the counter, watching the dark liquid fill my mug. I really needed the caffeine. I replied, keeping my voice conversational and light. "It has been a very long night, Monique. I had to stop your husband from sedating my father. Then I had to coordinate an emergency property deed retrieval. Now I have to stand here and listen to you scream. A girl needs her coffee to deal with all this exhausting incompetence." Monique let out a shrill sound of pure frustration. She marched around the island, snatching a silver sugar bowl and slamming it down next to my mug. "You are totally delusional," she snarled, leaning close to my face. "You are in complete denial. Bradley is taking over everything. By tomorrow, your father is going to be locked in a padded room where he belongs. Bradley will have full control of the bank accounts, the investments, and this entire estate. We are going to sell this place, take the cash, and never look back." I picked up a small silver spoon and carefully stirred a single cube of sugar into my coffee. I lifted the mug, took a slow, deliberate sip, and let the warm liquid soothe my freezing body. I looked at Monique over the rim of the mug. The sheer blinding arrogance radiating from her was almost fascinating to witness. "It is incredibly bold of you to assume you have anything left to sell," I said softly. Monique frowned, taking a half step backward. "What is that supposed to mean?" I set the mug down on the counter with a quiet clink. "You and Bradley love to throw around the word ownership. You love to act like you are the king and queen of this Bellevue estate. But you have always been terrible with money, Monique. Both of you. You max out credit cards on designer clothes, while Bradley burns through his commission checks trying to impress his country club buddies." I took a step toward her, my presence suddenly dominating the large kitchen. "5 years ago, your husband completely bankrupted himself," I stated, watching her eyes widen slightly. "He was drowning in secondary mortgages. The bank was literally 3 days away from sending the county sheriff here to foreclose on this property and throw your designer bags onto the front lawn. But suddenly, a miracle happened. A private equity firm stepped in, bought the debt, and restructured his loans. Bradley was so desperate to save his own skin that he signed the restructuring paperwork without even consulting a lawyer." Monique crossed her arms defensively, though her hands were beginning to shake. "I know all about the restructuring loan," she shot back. "So what? We pay our mortgage to a holding company now. That does not change the fact that Bradley's name is on the original deed. We still own this house." I tilted my head, my eyes locking onto hers with terrifying precision. "You really should have read the fine print on your mortgage, Monique." She froze. The 3 friends hovering near the kitchen entrance suddenly stopped giggling. The entire room went dead silent save for the hum of the refrigerator and the steady drumming of the rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows. "What fine print?" Monique demanded, her voice losing its aggressive edge, replaced by a creeping, undeniable panic. Before I could explain the massive, devastating legal trap her husband had walked blindly into 5 years ago, the screaming wail of police sirens pierced the morning air. The sound grew rapidly louder, echoing violently through the wealthy, quiet neighborhood. Red and blue emergency lights began flashing wildly through the massive kitchen windows, painting the marble countertops in aggressive, strobing colors. Monique whipped her head toward the window, then looked back at me, a vicious smile returning to her face as the panic temporarily subsided. "You can explain the fine print to the judge at your arraignment," Monique spat out, pointing toward the front of the house. "The police are here. Your career is over, Sydney." Heavy, frantic pounding echoed from the front double doors. Loud, authoritative voices shouted from the foyer. "Seattle Police? Is anyone in the house? Show yourself right now." Monique sprinted out of the kitchen, her friends rushing right behind her, all of them eager to point the officers directly at me. I took one last calm sip of my coffee, adjusted my shirt, and turned to face the hallway. Heavy boots stomped rapidly across the hardwood floor. 3 uniformed police officers stormed into the kitchen entrance, their hands resting firmly on their duty belts, their eyes scanning the room until they locked onto me standing alone by the espresso machine. "Ma'am," the lead officer barked, pointing a firm finger directly at my chest. "Step away from the counter and keep your hands where I can see them. You are currently trespassing in violation of an active court order. Put your hands behind your back right now." "Put your hands behind your back right now," the lead officer commanded, his hand resting heavily on the handcuffs clipped to his belt. He took a wide, aggressive stance, fully prepared to take me down to the marble floor of the kitchen. Monique let out a squeal of absolute delight. She bounced on her designer heels, clapping her hands together. "I told you," she gloated, pointing a manicured finger at my face. "You cannot just break into my house. Officer, arrest her. She has a restraining order against her. Read her rights." I did not raise my hands. I did not step back. I kept my posture perfectly straight and looked directly at the gold bars pinned to the collar of the lead officer's uniform. "Captain," I said, my voice projecting calm, absolute authority, "before you make a career-ending mistake on a Saturday morning, I highly suggest you read the document sitting right here on the kitchen island." The captain paused. My total lack of fear combined with my sharp, commanding tone made him hesitate. He looked at my face, and I saw the exact same flash of recognition that Officer Dawson had experienced at the precinct an hour ago. He recognized the newly elected district attorney standing in the middle of a crime scene. "Ma'am," the captain said, his aggressive posture softening into cautious confusion. "We received a 911 call reporting a home invasion and a restraining order violation." "I understand what was reported," I replied smoothly. "But you are currently responding to a false police report filed by a woman who is actively occupying this property illegally." I reached into my waterproof briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of papers. I laid them flat on the marble countertop. "This is the certified master deed for this estate," I stated, tapping the heavy parchment. "This property is fully owned by Apex Financial, LLC. I am the sole acting CEO of that holding company. My brother Bradley and his wife Monique are nothing more than month-to-month tenants. They are currently 4 months delinquent on their rent payments." Monique scoffed loudly. "That is a total lie. My husband pays the mortgage. Do not listen to her. She is crazy." I ignored her completely and pulled out a second document, this one bearing a fresh, bright red seal from the King County Superior Court. While driving to Bellevue, I had called in a massive favor from a night court judge I had worked alongside for years. Once I provided him with the police report number regarding the felony elder abuse, the attempted theft, and the severe property destruction taking place, he had electronically signed the exact document I needed. "This is an emergency writ of restitution," I told the captain, sliding the court order toward him. "It was signed by Judge Harrison exactly 20 minutes ago." Under Washington state law, when a tenant commits a violent felony on the premises and actively destroys the property, the landlord is granted an immediate emergency eviction order. The restraining order she showed you was filed under fraudulent pretenses to cover up her assault on my father. This emergency eviction legally supersedes her right to be on my property. The captain picked up the paperwork. His eyes scanned the master deed, verifying the LLC ownership, and then locked onto the red seal of the emergency eviction order. He read the judge's signature and the bold printed words demanding immediate vacation of the premises. The entire atmosphere in the kitchen shifted violently. The power dynamic flipped so fast it gave everyone whiplash. The captain handed the papers back to me with a respectful nod. "My apologies, Madam District Attorney," he said firmly. "We were given false information by the caller." He turned around and locked his eyes on Monique. The professional courtesy he had shown her moments ago completely vanished. "Ma'am," the captain barked, "you are no longer a legal resident of this property. You and your guests have exactly 2 minutes to gather your personal items and exit the premises. If you do not leave immediately, you will be arrested for criminal trespassing." Monique stared at him, her mouth hanging wide open in pure shock. "No," she gasped, stepping backward until her back hit the refrigerator. "No, that is impossible. Bradley owns this house. He told me he owns this house. You cannot kick me out." "I am not asking," the captain warned, stepping toward her. "Move, now!" Monique threw a massive, unhinged tantrum. She stomped her feet against the marble floor, screaming at the top of her lungs. "You are all corrupt. You are helping her steal my house. I am calling Bradley right now. He will fire all of you. He will sue the entire police department." She yanked her phone from her pocket and frantically dialed Bradley's number. She put it on speakerphone, holding it up like a weapon. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, and then went straight to voicemail. Bradley was not answering. He had abandoned her to save his own skin the second his lawyer walked out of the hospital. He was completely unreachable. "Brad, pick up the phone," Monique screamed hysterically into the voicemail. "Pick up the phone. She is trying to throw me out." Her 3 friends, who had been holding their phones up to record my humiliation, suddenly realized they were aiding and abetting a criminal occupation. They looked at the angry police officers, then looked at the emergency eviction order sitting on the counter. Pure panic washed over their faces. "We have to go," one of the friends whispered. "I am not going to jail for this." Jail. They did not even say goodbye to Monique. The 3 women grabbed their designer purses, shoved past the police officers, and sprinted out the front door, leaving their so-called best friend completely alone to face the consequences. Monique dropped her phone. She looked wildly around the trashed kitchen, realizing for the first time that her protective bubble of wealth and privilege had just violently popped. A female police officer grabbed Monique firmly by the upper arm. "Time is up," the officer said coldly. "You are leaving." "Get your hands off me!" Monique shrieked, thrashing her body from side to side. "My designer bags are upstairs. My jewelry is in the master bedroom. I am not leaving without my things." "You can arrange a civil standby with the court next week to collect your remaining belongings," the captain stated, signaling for another officer to assist. "Right now, you are vacating the premises." The 2 officers physically marched Monique out of the kitchen. She kicked and screamed the entire way down the hallway. She dug her expensive high heels into the hardwood floor, trying to drag her dead weight to slow them down. They dragged her right through the grand foyer, past the empty wine bottles she had stolen from my father, and past the muddy footprints her fake friends had tracked across the Persian rugs. I followed closely behind, carrying my warm mug of coffee. I stood in the doorway of the grand entrance and watched the absolute destruction of her ego. The officers shoved Monique through the heavy mahogany doors and out onto the front porch. The Seattle winter storm showed her absolutely no mercy. The freezing, torrential rain hit her instantly. The icy downpour soaked her expensive silk dress in a matter of seconds, plastering the thin fabric to her shivering body. The heavy wind whipped her elaborate braids wildly around her face, ruining her perfect, arrogant appearance. She stumbled down the stone steps and landed hard on the wet pavement of the driveway. She scrambled to her feet, her bare arms covered in goosebumps, shaking violently in the freezing cold. The police officers stood on the porch, forming a barricade between her and the warmth of the mansion. I stood behind them, completely dry, taking a slow sip of my coffee. Monique turned back to face me. The mascara was running down her cheeks in thick, dark rivers. She looked like a drowned, miserable creature. She had lost her house, her friends had abandoned her, and her husband was nowhere to be found. But she still refused to accept total defeat. She pointed a shaking, wet finger at me through the pouring rain. "You think you took everything from me," Monique screamed, her voice cracking over the howling wind. "You think throwing me out changes anything? We still have the key to the floor safe. We still have your father's $300,000 check. We are cashing it the second the bank opens, Sydney. You hear me? We are taking his money, and we are gone." I watched her through the pouring rain, my expression completely unchanged. I did not yell back. I did not run down the stone steps to snatch her designer handbag. I simply took another slow sip of my coffee and let the heavy mahogany doors swing shut, locking the freezing storm and my sister-in-law outside. She thought she was holding a winning lottery ticket in that wet leather purse. She had absolutely no idea she was holding the very evidence that would lock her in a federal prison cell. I set my mug on the pristine kitchen island and pulled my phone from my pocket. I sent a quick, precise message to my chief investigator, Hughes, instructing him to dispatch a private security team and a locksmith to the Bellevue estate immediately. The property was finally secure. Now it was time to drop the hammer. A few miles away, shivering uncontrollably and soaked to the bone, Monique stumbled down the wealthy, tree-lined street. The heavy rain had turned her expensive silk dress into a clinging, freezing nightmare. She clutched her designer purse tightly against her chest, her teeth chattering so violently she could barely breathe. She walked for nearly 4 blocks before a sleek black Mercedes-AMG suddenly swerved around the corner and screeched to a halt right beside her. The passenger door flew open. Bradley was sitting in the driver's seat, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, his eyes darting around the dark, rain-slicked street to make sure no police cruisers were following her. "Get in!" Bradley hissed, his voice frantic and high-pitched. Monique threw herself into the heated leather seat and slammed the door shut. The moment she was inside, her freezing shock mutated into pure, explosive rage. She turned to her husband and struck him hard on the shoulder with her heavy purse. "You left me," Monique screamed, water dripping from her ruined braids onto the expensive upholstery. "You ran away and left me to get thrown out into the mud by the police. Sydney took the house. She owns the holding company. We are completely homeless and you turned your phone off." Bradley grabbed her wrists, forcing her to stop hitting him. "I did not have a choice," he shouted back, his own panic bleeding through his arrogant facade. "Pierce dropped me as a client. Sydney threatened to have him disbarred and audited by the feds. If I had stayed at the hospital or come back to the house, she would have had me arrested for accessory to assault. I had to lay low." He let go of her wrists and ran a shaking hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up for the first time in his life. "We have nothing left," Monique Bradley muttered, staring blankly out the rain-covered windshield. "The bank accounts are overdrawn. The credit cards are maxed out. I do not even have enough cash to book us a hotel room for the night. Sydney destroyed everything in less than 2 hours." Monique stopped, shivering for a moment. Her breathing slowed as a cold, desperate determination settled over her ruined features. She unclasped her designer purse and reached inside, pulling out a folded piece of heavy bank paper. She did not destroy everything, Monique said, her voice dropping to a harsh, greedy whisper. "I grabbed this from the floor safe before I went out to the foyer to deal with her." Bradley looked down at the paper. It was the cashier check for $300,000 bearing their father's forged signature. His eyes widened, and a slow, desperate smile stretched across his face. The crushing reality of their homelessness vanished instantly, replaced by the familiar, toxic arrogance that had guided his entire life. "This is our way out," Bradley breathed, taking the check and examining the signature. "It looks perfect. My dad's handwriting is always a little shaky anyway. No bank teller is going to question this. We just need to wait until the main branch of Chase Bank opens downtown at 9 in the morning. We walk and deposit this into our joint account and immediately wire the entire balance to an offshore holding account I set up in the Cayman Islands last year. By the time Sydney figures out how to freeze the funds, the money will be completely untraceable. We can drive across the state line before noon." While Bradley and Monique sat in their parked car, shivering and plotting their grand escape, I was already 3 steps ahead of them. I arrived at the King County District Attorney office just before 7 in the morning. The massive downtown building was quiet and empty, but I was operating on pure razor-sharp adrenaline. I bypassed the security desk with a quick flash of my badge and took the private elevator straight to the top floor. I walked into my spacious corner office, flipped on the lights, and sat behind my heavy oak desk, overlooking the waking Seattle skyline. I did not bother changing out of my damp clothes. I picked up my secure office phone and dialed a direct, unlisted federal line. The phone rang twice before a deep, alert voice answered. "Agent Mitchell," the voice stated professionally. "Mitchell, it is Sydney Carter," I said, leaning back in my leather chair. "I know it is early, but I need a massive favor from the FBI Financial Crimes Division, and I need it mobilized in the next 90 minutes. Sydney. Agent Mitchell replied, his tone immediately warming with respect. "Congratulations on the election victory. What kind of mess are you handing me before I even finish my morning coffee?" "I am handing you an open and shut case of felony wire fraud, forgery, and elder financial exploitation," I explained smoothly. "The suspects are my brother and his wife. They are currently in possession of a stolen cashier check worth $300,000. The signature is forged. They assaulted my father to get it, and they are going to try to cash it and wire the funds offshore the second the banks open this morning." I heard the sound of a chair squeaking as Agent Mitchell sat up straight. "You want us to intercept the transaction?" "I do not just want you to intercept it," I said, my voice hardening into absolute steel. "I want you to let them think they have gotten away with it, right up until the last possible second. I know exactly which bank branch they use. They will go to the main Chase Bank on 4th Avenue because Bradley thinks the branch manager likes him. I'm going to head over there right now to have a little chat with the staff. I want your agents positioned in the lobby by 8:45. "Consider the trap set," Madam Prosecutor Mitchell said. "We will be waiting." An hour and a half later, the freezing rain had slowed to a light drizzle. Bradley and Monique sat in their Mercedes, parked halfway down the block from the towering glass facade of the Chase Bank building. They had spent the last hour desperately trying to clean themselves up using the vanity mirrors in the car. Bradley had smoothed down his wrinkled cashmere sweater and fixed his hair with a spare comb from the glove compartment. Monique had used wet wipes to clean the running mascara from her cheeks, pulling her damp braids back into a tight, severe bun. She wrung the excess rainwater out of her silk dress, trying to ignore the damp, freezing fabric clinging to her skin. "We have to look like we belong here," Bradley instructed, gripping the steering wheel. "We cannot look desperate. We walk in there like we own the place, just like we always do. We are wealthy clients conducting a standard business transaction. If you look nervous, they will ask questions." "I am not nervous," Monique snapped, clutching her purse tightly. "I just want this money so we can leave that miserable sister of yours in our rearview mirror forever." The digital clock on the dashboard clicked to exactly 9 in the morning. Across the street, a security guard stepped forward and unlocked the heavy glass doors of the bank, propping them open for the start of the business day. Bradley killed the engine. He stepped out of the luxury car, walked around to the passenger side, and offered his wife his arm. Monique took it, lifting her chin high into the air. They pasted on their most arrogant, entitled smiles. They rolled their shoulders back, projecting the absolute illusion of wealth and untouchable privilege. They stepped onto the sidewalk and walked confidently toward the bank entrance, completely and utterly unaware that they were marching straight into a federal cage. The heavy glass doors of the Chase Bank main branch slid open with a soft mechanical hum. Bradley and Monique stepped out of the freezing Seattle drizzle and into the sprawling, climate-controlled lobby. The interior was a cathedral of high finance. Polished marble floors reflected the warm light of modern chandeliers. The air smelled of expensive espresso and fresh currency. It was an environment designed to make wealthy people feel secure and untouchable. Bradley adjusted his posture the moment his leather shoes touched the marble. He threw his shoulders back and lifted his chin instantly, transforming back into the arrogant, entitled investment broker he had pretended to be for the last decade. He completely ignored the queue of everyday customers waiting patiently behind the velvet ropes. He was a Carter. He did not wait in lines, not wait. He marched directly toward the premium services desk located at the far end of the lobby. Monique followed closely at his side. She was shivering violently underneath her thin silk dress, but she forced her frozen face into a mask of haughty superiority. She clutched her damp designer handbag against her ribs, guarding the stolen cashier check as if her life depended on it. A senior teller was sitting behind the mahogany premium desk. He was an older man with wire-rimmed glasses and a perfectly pressed suit. Just 15 minutes ago, this exact teller had received a very specific, highly classified briefing from federal agents. But as Bradley approached the teller, simply looked up and offered a warm, practiced customer service smile. "Good morning, sir," the teller greeted him smoothly. "How can I assist you with your premium account today?" Bradley did not offer a greeting in return. He leaned his weight against the mahogany counter, projecting complete dominance over the interaction. He snapped his fingers at Monique. She hastily unclasped her purse, pulled out the heavy bank paper, and handed it to her husband. Bradley slapped the $300,000 check face up onto the counter. He slid his driver license right next to it. "I need to process an immediate outbound wire transfer," Bradley commanded, his tone sharp and demanding. "The funds are drawn from my father's primary retirement account. The payee is my wife, Monique Carter, who is standing right here with her identification. We need the entire balance wired directly into my offshore holding account in the Cayman Islands. I want the transaction expedited and cleared before 10 o'clock. The senior teller picked up the check. He examined the forged signature of Thomas Carter. He looked at the massive sum printed across the center line. He did not flinch. He did not show a single ounce of suspicion. He simply nodded and began typing rapidly on his keyboard. "Of course, Mr. Carter," the teller said politely. "A transfer of this size to an international destination requires a few extra security protocols, but I will get that initiated for you right away. May I see your identification as well, ma'am?" Monique practically threw her driver license onto the counter. Her hands were shaking so badly that the plastic card rattled against the wood. "Just hurry up," she snapped, her voice tight with panic. "We have a flight to catch." The teller offered her a reassuring smile. "Certainly, Mrs. Carter. Just booting up the international wire portal now." Bradley crossed his arms and tapped his expensive watch, looking around the bank lobby to ensure people were noticing his VIP status. He felt completely invincible. He had successfully escaped the hospital. He had secured the check. He was minutes away from washing his hands of his bleeding father and his ruined life in Seattle. But as the minutes ticked by, the silence at the premium desk began to stretch. The rapid clicking of the teller's keyboard slowed down, then stopped entirely. The teller stared intently at his computer monitor, clicking his mouse a few times, with a slight manufactured frown on his face. Bradley shifted his weight, his annoyance flaring. "Is there a problem here?" The teller looked up apologetically. "My sincerest apologies, Mr. Carter. It appears our global routing system is running a mandatory morning update. The software is lagging slightly. It should only be another minute or two. Can I offer either of you a bottle of sparkling water while we wait?" "I do not want water," Bradley barked, his voice rising enough to draw the attention of a nearby security guard. "I want my money wired. I have been a premium client at this bank for years. Do not give me excuses about software updates. Push the transfer through manually." "I completely understand your frustration, sir," the teller replied, his voice remaining absolutely perfectly calm. "Unfortunately, federal banking regulations require digital dual authentication for any offshore transfer exceeding $50,000. The system simply has to finish its loading cycle. It is currently at 70%. Monique grabbed Bradley's arm. Her acrylic nails dug painfully through his cashmere sweater. "Brad," she whispered frantically, her eyes darting toward the front doors. "Something is wrong. Why is it taking so long?" "They never take this long." Bradley yanked his arm away from her grip. "Shut up," he hissed under his breath. "You are acting completely paranoid. Stop sweating and act like you belong here. You are going to draw attention to us." He turned his furious glare back to the teller. He slammed his hand flat against the mahogany counter, dropping all pretense of polite business etiquette. "Listen to me very carefully," Bradley threatened, leaning over the desk. "I personally know the branch manager of this location. We play golf together. If you do not bypass this ridiculous loading screen and wire my money right this second, I am going to have you fired before your lunch break. I will move my entire financial portfolio to a competitor down the street. Do you understand who you are dealing with?" The teller did not back away from Bradley's aggressive posture. He looked at the computer screen one more time, then looked directly into Bradley's furious eyes. "I apologize for the unacceptable delay, Mr. Carter," the teller said smoothly, his tone suddenly shifting from subservient to incredibly formal. "You are absolutely right to demand better service. In fact, since this transaction is so substantial, the branch manager is available right now to personally expedite this wire transfer for you." Bradley let out a loud, arrogant breath of triumph. He adjusted his collar and shot Monique a victorious look. "See," he told her proudly. "That is how you handle the hired help." He looked back at the teller. "Well, go get him then." The teller did not move from his chair. He simply looked past Bradley, his eyes focusing on the back wall of the bank lobby. "Right this way, sir," the teller announced clearly. Bradley and Monique turned around at the exact same time. At the far end of the marble lobby, the heavy oak doors of the bank manager's private office slowly opened. The heavy oak doors of the branch manager's private office did not just open. They swung wide with a deliberate echoing thud that commanded the attention of the entire marble lobby. Bradley and Monique stood frozen at the premium services desk, their arrogant postures instantly crumbling. I walked out of that office not as the soaking wet sister they had just mocked on the front porch of the Bellevue estate, but as the district attorney of King County. I had shed my ruined trench coat. I was wearing a sharp, tailored navy suit I kept in my office for emergency press conferences. I looked immaculate, authoritative, and completely in control. Walking right beside me was Agent Mitchell. He was a towering man with broad shoulders, wearing a dark federal windbreaker and a stern, unyielding expression that immediately sucked all the remaining oxygen out of the room. Bradley stared at me, his eyes wide and completely bloodshot. His mouth opened, but his voice cracked, reducing his demanding tone to a pathetic, confused squeak. Sidney Bradley stammered, gripping the edge of the mahogany counter to keep his knees from buckling. "What are you doing back there? How did you get in here?" "I am simply expediting your transaction, Bradley," I replied, my voice projecting smoothly across the quiet bank. "You told the teller you were in a rush to wire $300,000 offshore. I thought I would bring the proper authorities down here to assist you with the paperwork." Monique let out a sharp gasp. She looked at me, then looked at the towering federal agent standing at my side. The reality of the situation hit her like a freight train. This was not a system update. There was no software lag. The entire interaction at the premium desk had been a carefully orchestrated stall tactic. They had been standing in a trap for the last 10 minutes. "The money," Monique shrieked, suddenly slapping her hands against Bradley's chest. "Get the check back. Bradley, get the check." Bradley snapped out of his paralyzed state. Pure primal panic overrode whatever rational thought he had left. He lunged his upper body entirely over the wide mahogany counter, his arms stretching out as far as they could go. He swiped his hands frantically across the polished wood, trying to snatch the forged cashier check right out of the senior teller's workspace. He never even got close. An armed bank security guard, who had been quietly repositioning himself behind Bradley for the last 3 minutes, lunged forward. The guard grabbed Bradley by the back of his expensive cashmere sweater and hauled him backward with brutal force. Bradley slammed into the velvet stanchions, knocking them over with a loud metallic crash that echoed across the entire bank lobby. "Step back from the counter right now, sir," the armed guard ordered, stepping squarely between Bradley and the teller desk. "Keep your hands where I can see them." The senior teller calmly picked up the $300,000 check, placed it inside a clear plastic evidence bag, and slid it directly across the counter to Agent Mitchell. Bradley stumbled to regain his balance, his face completely flushed with panic and humiliation. "You cannot do this!" he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at the teller. "That is my money. That is my father's retirement check. Give it back to me right now. I am closing my accounts. I am leaving this bank." Agent Mitchell took a deliberate step forward. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his leather credential wallet, and flipped it open, flashing his gold shield under the bright chandelier lights. "Special Agent Mitchell, Federal Bureau of Investigation Financial Crimes Division," he announced, his deep voice leaving absolutely no room for debate. "You are not closing any accounts today, Mr. Carter, and you are certainly not leaving this building. The document you just attempted to process has been officially flagged by the federal government." Monique grabbed the collar of her damp silk dress, struggling to draw air into her lungs. "Flagged?" She gasped, her eyes darting frantically toward the front doors. "What do you mean, flagged? We did not do anything wrong." Agent Mitchell held up the clear plastic bag containing the check. "This transaction has been flagged for suspected federal wire fraud, cross-border money laundering, and severe elder financial exploitation. We have credible evidence indicating that the signature on this cashier check was forged. Furthermore, we have reason to believe this document was obtained through the physical assault and robbery of a vulnerable senior citizen." Bradley looked like he was about to vomit. The color drained from his face so fast he looked practically translucent. He looked at me, his eyes silently begging for the sister he used to bully to somehow save him from the federal cage closing in around him. I just stared back at him with a cold, unblinking smile. I was not his victim anymore. I was his executioner. "This is a misunderstanding," Bradley pleaded, his voice trembling so badly he sounded like a frightened child. "Sydney, please, tell them this is just a family dispute. Tell them Dad gave me this money to help with my business." Before I could deliver my response, the heavy glass doors at the front of the bank lobby burst open. Gregory Pierce, Bradley's sleazy, high-priced corporate lawyer, came marching into the bank. He was breathing heavily, his expensive suit slightly rumpled from running down the city block. After fleeing the hospital emergency room, Gregory must have realized that if Bradley went down for elder abuse and federal wire fraud, Bradley would immediately cut a plea deal and testify against Gregory for advising him on the fraudulent medical power of attorney. Gregory had to protect his own license. He had to spin this crime into a civil family matter before the federal agent slapped handcuffs on his client. "Do not say another word!" Bradley Gregory shouted, storming across the marble floor and inserting himself directly between his client and the FBI agent. "I am this man's legal counsel, and I am putting a stop to this circus right now." Gregory turned his furious glare toward me, pointing an aggressive finger in my direction. "This is a complete sham," Gregory declared loudly, making sure every customer and employee in the bank lobby could hear him. "This woman is the district attorney, and she is grossly abusing her political power to terrorize her own family. That check is not stolen. It is not fraud. That money was a willing, deliberate gift from Thomas Carter to his son." Gregory turned back to Agent Mitchell, puffing out his chest to project legal authority. "My client has been the sole caretaker for his father for years. Thomas Carter signed that check willingly before his unfortunate accident last night. You have absolutely no proof of coercion, and you have zero proof of an assault. This is a civil dispute over a wealthy estate, and this prosecutor is using the FBI as her own personal collection agency. You need to return that check to my client and back off before I file a massive civil rights lawsuit against the federal government." Gregory Pierce let his final threat hang in the air, his chest heaving as he glared at the federal agent. The entire bank lobby was completely frozen. Customers who had been waiting in line were now openly staring, their deposit slips forgotten in their hands. The bank security guards stood at strict attention, waiting for a cue. Agent Mitchell did not flinch. He did not step back, and he certainly did not look intimidated by the aggressive corporate lawyer invading his personal space. Mitchell simply adjusted his federal windbreaker and looked down at Gregory with an expression of pure, unadulterated boredom. "Is that right, Counselor Agent Mitchell?" said, his deep voice entirely devoid of emotion. "You are telling me that a 68-year-old man willingly signed over his entire life savings to his son and then immediately suffered a mysterious blunt force trauma to his skull. You are claiming this was a generous gift, completely unrelated to the fact that your client's wife was swinging an aluminum baseball bat in the same room. Gregory opened his mouth to fire back another legal threat, but I did not give him the chance to control the narrative. I stepped right up beside Agent Mitchell, crossing my arms as I looked Gregory dead in the eye. You are walking on incredibly thin ice, Gregory. I warned him, keeping my tone deadly and precise. You are currently standing in a federal crime scene attempting to obstruct an active FBI investigation. I strongly suggest you think about your own law license before you tie yourself to a sinking ship. Your client is going to federal prison. If you keep talking, I will make sure you share a cell with him for aiding and abetting. Gregory hesitated. The arrogant fire in his eyes flickered as he calculated the risks. He was a ruthless lawyer, but he was not stupid. He knew exactly what kind of power I held as the district attorney, and he knew the FBI did not flag offshore wire transfers based on mere speculation. He took a tiny, almost imperceptible half-step backward, physically distancing himself from Bradley. Monique saw that tiny step. She saw the highly paid lawyer backing down, and sheer panic finally shattered her arrogant facade. She realized the legal shield was cracking, and if she did not take control right now, she was going to leave this bank in handcuffs. Monique shoved past her paralyzed husband and threw herself directly into the center of the standoff. She decided to play her ultimate trump card. She was going to play the victim. "You are all twisting this," Monique shrieked, turning away from us to address the audience of stunned bank customers and employees. She threw her hands up in the air, her voice vibrating with manufactured trauma. "Look at me. Look at what he did to me." She pointed dramatically to her damp silk dress, then aggressively thrust her arm forward, displaying the microscopic red scratch near her elbow. "That crazy old man attacked me!" Monique wailed, forcing tears to well up in her eyes. "He has been losing his mind for a year. I have sacrificed my life to take care of him. Last night he completely snapped. He came at me in the dark and tried to kill me. He hit me and my husband had to tackle him to the floor to save my life." She paused, wiping a fake tear from her cheek, making sure every person in the lobby was hanging on her every word. Gregory tried to grab her arm to pull her back, whispering furiously for her to invoke her right to remain silent, but Monique aggressively yanked her arm away. She was too desperate to listen to legal counsel. She believed her own lies so deeply that she thought she could convince the federal agents by sheer force of will. He felt guilty. Monique cried out, pointing at the plastic evidence bag holding the cashier check. Thomas realized what he had done. He saw that he had hurt me and he started crying. He begged us not to call the police. He gave us that check willingly. He signed it and handed it to Bradley as an apology. He told us to take the money and start a new life, because he knew he needed to go to a psychiatric facility. He gave it to us. It is our money. Bradley quickly caught on to her desperate strategy. He nodded vigorously, stepping up beside his wife to present a united front. "Yes," Bradley added, his voice shaking but loud. "Dad gave me the check. He told me to wire it offshore so it would be safe. He wanted me to have it. My sister is just jealous because our father cut her out of the will years ago. She is using her political office to steal my inheritance." Agent Mitchell looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. He was waiting for my signal to shut them down, but I gave him a tiny shake of my head. I wanted Monique to keep talking. As a prosecutor, I knew the most dangerous thing you could ever do was interrupt a criminal who was eagerly digging their own grave. Monique mistook my silence for defeat. She thought her performance was working. The adrenaline surged through her veins, replacing her fear with a toxic, blinding arrogance. She marched right up to me, stopping mere inches from my face. She looked me up and down, a vicious sneer twisting her features. "You have nothing!" Sydney Monique spat, her voice, dropping into a harsh, venomous whisper, meant only for me. "You can bring the FBI. You can wear your fancy suit, but you cannot prove a single thing." She leaned in closer, pointing a shaking finger directly at my chest. "You have no proof I hit him," Monique declared, her voice rising in pitch and volume until it echoed off the marble walls. "There were no cameras in that house. None. It is your word against mine, and I have a bruised arm. I have the physical injury. The police already took my statement. Your father is a senile old man who fell and hit his own head. You cannot prosecute me because you have absolutely zero evidence. I stood perfectly still. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I let her furious, desperate words hang in the heavy air of the bank lobby. I looked at her ruined hair, her damp clothes, and the absolute panic hiding just behind her arrogant eyes. Then very slowly, a smile began to spread across my face. It was not a happy smile. It was a cold, terrifying, victorious smile. It was the smile of a predator watching a trap snap entirely shut. You are right, Monique, I said, my voice smooth, calm, and laced with absolute certainty. There were no cameras in that house. I paused, letting the silence stretch for one agonizing heartbeat, locking my eyes with hers. Until last week. The echo of my words hung in the sterile air of the bank lobby. Until last week. Monique stumbled backward as if I had physically struck her. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out my sleek silver iPad. I walked right past her rigid body and approached the large digital display monitor mounted behind the premium services desk. The bank teller quickly stepped aside as I pulled a connection cable from my bag and plugged my tablet directly into the bank system. I turned to face Agent Mitchell and the entire crowd of stunned bank customers. My father called me 2 weeks ago in tears, I explained, keeping my voice steady and loud enough for everyone to hear. He told me that thick envelopes of cash and several of his vintage watches had suddenly vanished from his private study. Since my brother Bradley controlled the security codes to the estate, I knew standard cameras would be disabled or tampered with. So I hired an elite private security firm. I had them bypass the main alarm system entirely. They swapped out every single hardwired smoke detector in the hallways and the study with custom units containing hidden 4K resolution night vision lenses. My brother and his wife had absolutely no idea they were being watched from the ceiling. I tapped the screen of my iPad. The massive monitor behind the teller desk flickered to life. A crystal-clear black and white night vision feed filled the screen. The angle provided a perfect, unobstructed overhead view of my father's private study. I pressed play. The bank lobby went dead silent. Everyone watched as the digital timestamp on the bottom corner of the video read 2:15 in the morning. A figure slipped into the dark study. It was unmistakably Monique, wearing the exact same silk dress she was currently shivering inside. We watched her kneel on the Persian rug and punch a code into the heavy steel floor safe. The safe door swung open. She reached inside and pulled out the exact piece of paper currently sitting inside Agent Mitchell's plastic evidence bag. The $300,000 cashier check. A few seconds later, the study door opened wider. My father, Thomas, walked into the frame. He was wearing his thin cotton pajamas. We could not hear the audio clearly through the smoke detector microphone, but the body language was undeniable. My father pointed at the safe and demanded she put the check back. Monique did not hesitate. The video showed her reaching into the corner of the room. She grabbed the heavy aluminum baseball bat Bradley kept near the door. With a vicious, calculated swing, she struck my father directly on the side of his head. Several people in this bank lobby gasped out loud. One woman covered her mouth in horror. On the screen, my father crumpled to the hardwood floor, clutching his bleeding forehead. He was completely incapacitated. Then the most damning part of the footage played. Bradley ran into the study. He saw his father bleeding on the floor. He saw his wife holding the bloody baseball bat and the stolen retirement check. He did not rush to his father's side. He did not grab a phone to call an ambulance. The high-definition camera captured Bradley stepping right over his father's bleeding legs. He looked at the check in Monique's hand and gave her a sharp nod. He pointed toward the door, instructing her to call the police to set up their disgusting lie about my father having dementia. He left his own father to bleed out on the rug, just to secure a payday. I paused the video right on a freeze frame of Bradley's cold, uncaring face, looking down at the man who had given him everything. I disconnected my iPad and turned back to face the lobby. Gregory Pierce. The high-priced corporate lawyer took one look at the frozen image on the screen and physically backed away from Bradley. He did not say a single word. He just turned around and sprinted out the heavy glass doors of the bank, completely abandoning his client to save his own career and his law license. Agent Mitchell crossed his massive arms over his chest. He looked down at Monique, who was now shaking so violently her teeth were visibly chattering. "Your bruised arm is not going to hold up well against 4K federal evidence," Mrs. Carter Mitchell stated, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. Monique let out a hysterical, high-pitched sob. She looked wildly at the armed bank guards blocking the exits. The reality of federal prison was finally crashing down on her. She turned to Bradley, her eyes wide with absolute panic. "Do something!" she shrieked, slapping his chest with both hands. "Tell them it was your idea. You told me to hit him. You said we needed the cash to run away. Tell them you planned it." Bradley did not defend her. He did not even look at her. The golden child of the Carter family was entirely broken. His knees gave out, and he collapsed right onto the polished marble floor of the bank. He buried his face in his hands and started sobbing uncontrollably. The arrogant illusion of the successful investment broker was completely shattered, revealing the pathetic, greedy coward he had always been. The entire bank lobby remained paralyzed in a state of absolute dead silence. The only sound echoing across the sprawling marble floor was the pathetic, ragged sobbing of my older brother. Bradley was curled into a miserable ball at my feet, his expensive cashmere sweater brushing against the polished stone. The grand illusion of the untouchable golden child had finally shattered. He was not a successful investment broker. He was not the brilliant heir to the Carter family legacy. He was just a cowardly, failing fraud who had broken under the very first consequence he had ever faced in his entire 37 years of life. Monique looked down at her husband weeping on the floor. The absolute panic in her eyes instantly morphed into cold, vicious self-preservation. She realized in a fraction of a second that Bradley was a sinking ship. He had no lawyer, no money, and no plan. If she stayed loyal to him, she was going to spend the best years of her life in a federal penitentiary, wearing a bright orange jumpsuit instead of her designer silk dresses. Monique physically stepped away from him, distancing herself from the man she had sworn to love. She turned her entire body toward Agent Mitchell, holding her hands up in a frantic gesture of surrender. "Listen to me," Monique shouted, her voice completely hysterical as she pointed a shaking finger down at Bradley. "It was all his idea. You have to believe me. I did not want to do it. He made me do it." Agent Mitchell did not react to her screaming. He simply reached into the inner pocket of his federal windbreaker, pulled out a small notepad, and clicked his pen. "I am listening, Mrs. Carter, Agent Mitchell," said his voice a low, encouraging rumble. "Why do you not tell me exactly what your husband made you do?" Monique did not hesitate for a single second. She threw the man she married entirely under the bus without a shred of remorse. "He is drowning in debt." Monique gasped the words spilling out of her mouth in a desperate rush. "He owes money to dangerous people, unlicensed lenders downtown. He told me they were going to break his legs if he did not come up with $300,000 by the end of the month. He knew his dad was transferring his retirement funds. Bradley gave me the combination to the floor safe. He told me exactly when the old man went to sleep." Monique pointed at the frozen image of the security footage still glowing on the large bank monitor. "I just went in there to get the check," Monique sobbed, trying to force a look of innocent terror onto her face. "But Thomas woke up. He surprised me. I panicked. Bradley told me beforehand that if the old man woke up, I had to keep him quiet at all costs. Bradley said we would take the money, wire it to the Cayman Islands, and start a luxury life where no one could find us. He manipulated me. I am a victim of his financial abuse." Bradley lifted his head from the marble floor. His face was red and bloated from crying, and his eyes widened in absolute shock at his wife's brutal betrayal. "Shut up," Monique, Bradley screamed, his voice cracking as he scrambled onto his knees. "Do not believe her. She wanted the money just as much as I did. She is the one who picked up the baseball bat. I did not tell her to hit him. She enjoyed it. She has always hated my father." "You lying coward," Monique shrieked back at him, her acrylic nails curling into fists at her sides. "You watched him bleed. You told me to call the police and say he went crazy. You orchestrated the entire psychiatric hold. You are the one who hired the lawyer to drug him at the hospital." They screamed at each other right there in the middle of the bank. It was a vicious, ugly, pathetic display of a toxic marriage tearing itself apart the moment the money ran out. They were like two cornered rats fighting over scraps, completely exposing every single detail of their premeditated felony to a federal agent holding a notepad. Bradley realized that screaming at his wife was not going to stop the FBI from locking him in a cage. He snapped his head around and looked up at me. The arrogant, condescending older brother who had mocked my cheap apartment and my student loans just a few hours ago was entirely gone. He crawled across the polished marble floor toward me. He reached out with a trembling hand, trying to grab the hem of my tailored navy suit skirt. I took a sharp, deliberate step backward, refusing to let him touch me. "Sydney, please." Bradley begged, tears and snot running down his face. "You have to help me. I am your brother. I am your own flesh and blood. We grew up together." I stared down at him, my expression completely devoid of pity. "You are the district attorney," Bradley sobbed, pressing his hands together in a desperate, pleading motion. "You have the power to make this go away. You can talk to the FBI. You can grant me immunity. You can tell them this was just a massive misunderstanding. I will give the check back. I will apologize to Dad. I will do whatever you want, Sydney. Just please do not let them put me in prison. I will not survive in there." I looked at the miserable, broken man begging at my feet. I thought about the thousands of times he had belittled me. I thought about the years he spent basking in our parents' wealth while I scrubbed diner tables just to afford my law books. But most importantly, I thought about the image of him stepping directly over our father's bleeding body. "You want me to use my political office to save you?" I asked, my voice ringing with cold, absolute authority. "You want me to protect the man who stood in a hospital trauma bay and ordered a doctor to inject my father with antipsychotics, so you could steal his life savings?" Bradley flinched as if I had struck him. "I was desperate," he cried out. "I was scared. I am so sorry, Sydney." "So, you are not sorry, Bradley," I stated, my tone dropping to a lethal whisper. "You are only sorry that you got caught. You told me to enjoy my homeless dad. You told me I was a pathetic loser who could not afford to fight you. You spent your entire life believing that your privilege made you invincible. You thought you could commit violent felonies and just charm your way out of them because you were the golden child." I leaned down slightly, making sure my words pierced straight through his pathetic delusions. "But the golden child just burned to the ground," I told him, "and the sister you threw to the wolves is the one holding the match. I am not granting you immunity, Bradley. I am going to personally oversee your prosecution, and I am going to request the absolute maximum sentence the state of Washington allows." Bradley let out a gut-wrenching wail of pure despair. He collapsed fully onto the marble floor, defeated, ruined, and completely out of options. Agent Mitchell stepped forward. He signaled to the armed bank security guards to secure the perimeter, ensuring neither suspect could make a sudden run for the doors. Mitchell reached around to the back of his duty belt. The heavy metallic sound echoed sharply through the silent bank lobby. It was the undeniable sound of absolute justice. Click, click. Agent Mitchell locked the heavy steel handcuffs tightly around Bradley's wrists, then immediately turned and slapped a second pair onto Monique. The cold click of the heavy steel handcuffs echoed sharply through the cavernous marble lobby of the bank. Agent Mitchell tightened the restraints around Monique's wrists, completely ignoring her frantic, hyperventilating gasps. Two uniformed Seattle police officers, who had been waiting outside the glass doors as tactical backup, immediately pushed their way into the lobby to assist the federal agent. Agent Mitchell took a deliberate step back and gestured for the local officers to take physical custody of the suspects. He squared his broad shoulders and delivered the Miranda warning with a practiced monotone efficiency that made the reality of the situation crash down on them like a concrete block. "You have the right to remain silent," Agent Mitchell announced, his deep voice carrying easily across the dead quiet room. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you." As he recited the familiar, terrifying words, the absolute severity of their downfall finally seemed to penetrate Bradley's panic-addled brain. But Agent Mitchell did not stop there. He made sure to list the specific charges aloud, ensuring every single bank employee and customer waiting in line heard exactly what the arrogant golden child and his wife had done. "You are being placed under federal and state arrest," Agent Mitchell stated clearly. "The charges include aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, elder abuse forgery, and attempted federal wire fraud." Monique completely lost whatever tiny shred of dignity she had left. She thrashed wildly against the firm grip of the female police officer holding her arm. "I am not going to jail," Monique shrieked, kicking her expensive designer heels against the polished marble floor. "I am the victim here. He is the one who owes money to dangerous loan sharks. He forced me to hit the old man. You cannot arrest me. I am a respectable citizen." She spat a string of vicious, unfiltered profanities, hurling insults at the arresting officers, at the terrified senior bank teller, and finally, at me. She twisted her neck, glaring at me with eyes full of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You set us up!" "Sydney!" Monique screamed, her voice cracking horribly. "You planned this entire thing just to steal your father's money for yourself. You are a corrupt, manipulative monster." I did not even blink. I stood perfectly still, my hands resting calmly at my sides, watching her utterly unravel. "I do not need to steal my father's money, Monique," I replied, my voice steady, smooth, and entirely devoid of emotion. "I earn my own paycheck. You should try it sometime, assuming the federal prison allows you to work in the cafeteria." Bradley was in even worse shape. The local police officers had to physically haul him up from the marble floor because his legs had turned to absolute jelly. The pristine, expensive cashmere sweater he had been so incredibly proud of earlier was now stretched out of shape and stained with floor wax and his own salty tears. He looked absolutely pathetic. As the officers dragged him toward the front exit, Bradley dug the rubber soles of his luxury leather shoes into the floor, desperately trying to stop their forward momentum. "Sydney, please," Bradley wailed, his handsome face contorted into a mask of pure agony. "Do not let them take me. I cannot go to prison. I am not cut out for it. I will not survive behind bars. Please call them off. I am your brother. I am your flesh and blood." I walked slowly toward the exit, stopping just a few feet away from where the officers were struggling to hold him upright. I looked him up and down, taking in every ounce of his miserable, shattered ego. "You lost the right to call yourself my brother the very moment you stepped over our father's bleeding body," I stated coldly, making sure my words pierced straight through his heart. "You wanted to lock him in a psychiatric ward so you could steal his life savings. You told me to enjoy my homeless dad while you took over his estate. Well, Bradley, I hope you enjoy your new concrete cell. I hear the state correctional facility does not offer premium room service." The officers hauled them out of the bank. The freezing Seattle rain was still falling in a steady, miserable drizzle. A large crowd of pedestrians and morning commuters had gathered on the wet sidewalk, drawn by the flashing red and blue emergency lights of the federal and local vehicles parked aggressively along the curb. Bradley wept openly as he was paraded past the onlookers. He tried to duck his head to hide his face from the crowd, but his handcuffed hands made it completely impossible to shield himself from the public humiliation. Monique fought the officers the entire way to the curb. She kicked the side of the police cruiser, screaming until her throat gave out before an officer firmly shoved her into the hard plastic back seat and slammed the heavy door shut. The flashing emergency lights bounced brilliantly off the wet pavement as the convoy of police cruisers pulled away from the curb. They carried my toxic brother and his vicious wife out of my life and straight into the unforgiving jaws of the criminal justice system. I stood inside the warm, dry bank lobby and watched their vehicles disappear into the heavy city traffic. I felt absolutely no guilt. I felt no remorse. I felt nothing but the clean, sharp satisfaction of a malignant tumor finally being excised from my life. Agent Mitchell walked up beside me. He was holding the clear plastic evidence bag containing the forged $300,000 check. He let out a low, appreciative whistle. That was one hell of a takedown. Madam Prosecutor, Agent Mitchell noted a distinct hint of professional respect warming his tone. We have the hidden security footage, the forged bank document, and a lobby full of reliable witnesses who just heard them turning on each other and confessing to the entire plot. My team will have their federal indictment paperwork drafted and filed before noon. I turned to the towering federal agent and offered him a firm, confident handshake. Thank you for the swift and professional response, Agent Mitchell. I will let the fraud division at my office coordinate directly with your team for the prosecution. Right now, I have somewhere else I need to be. I walked out of the Chase Bank, pulling my car keys from my pocket. The heavy rain had finally stopped, and the thick gray storm clouds over Seattle were beginning to break apart. The first bright, brilliant rays of morning sunlight hit the wet pavement, signaling the end of a very long, very dark night. I got into my car, started the engine, and headed straight back to Seattle General Hospital to give my father the news. The drive back to Seattle General Hospital felt entirely different from my frantic race across the city just a few hours earlier. The brutal winter storm that had battered the coast all night had finally broken. Brilliant rays of morning sunlight pierced through the thick gray clouds, casting a warm, golden glow across the wet pavement. I parked my car in the hospital garage, grabbed my briefcase, and walked through the sliding glass doors, with a profound sense of peace settling over my shoulders. I took the elevator up to the secure recovery floor. The hospital staff had followed my strict protective orders perfectly. 2 private security guards stood outside my father's room, ensuring absolutely no one could bypass the front desk. I flashed my badge and they immediately stepped aside to let me in. The room was quiet, save for the rhythmic, steady beeping of the heart monitor. My father was lying in the adjustable bed, propped up against a stack of white pillows. His head was heavily bandaged where the doctor had stitched the wound from the baseball bat. He looked incredibly frail, older than his 68 years, but the sheer terror that had consumed him at the police precinct was completely gone. When he heard my heels click against the linoleum floor, he turned his head. A weak, tentative smile spread across his bruised face. "Sydney," he whispered, his voice raspy from exhaustion. I walked over to the side of his bed and pulled up a chair. I took off my suit jacket, draped it over the back of the seat, and gently took his hand in mine. His skin felt warm, a vast improvement from the freezing, shivering state I had found him in at 3 in the morning. "It is all over, Dad," I told him, keeping my voice soft and reassuring. "I just left the main branch of Chase Bank. Agent Mitchell and the FBI intercepted the transaction exactly as planned. Your $300,000 cashier check is currently sitting in a federal evidence locker. The money is completely safe and it will be returned to your account as soon as the judge signs the release order." My father let out a long, shuddering breath, squeezing my fingers tightly. "And Bradley? What about Monique?" "They are in federal custody," I stated, offering him the absolute certainty he needed to hear. "They were arrested in the middle of the bank lobby in front of dozens of witnesses. We have the hidden camera footage from the smoke detector, and they both confessed while trying to throw each other under the bus to save their own skins. They are being charged with aggravated assault, elder abuse, and attempted wire fraud. They are going to federal prison, Dad. They will never be able to hurt you, threaten you, or steal from you ever again." I also told him about the emergency eviction. I explained how I had legally removed Monique and her friends from the Bellevue estate, securing the property and changing the locks. "You can go home as soon as the doctors clear you for discharge," I promised him. "The house belongs to me, but it is your home for as long as you want to live there. I have already arranged for a reputable background-checked private nursing staff to assist you during your recovery." Tears began to pool in my father's eyes, spilling over his weathered cheeks and soaking into the crisp hospital pillowcase. He did not cry out of physical pain. He cried out of a deep, overwhelming sense of shame. He looked down at our joined hands, unable to meet my gaze. "I do not deserve this, Sydney," my father sobbed quietly, his voice breaking under the weight of his own guilt. "I do not deserve your protection. I do not deserve your kindness. Not after the way I treated you your entire life." I sat quietly and let him speak. This was a conversation 34 years in the making, and it was a necessary step for both of our healing. I was so incredibly blind, he confessed, the tears flowing freely now. I poured every ounce of my love, my money, and my pride into your brother. I bought him cars. I bought him a mansion. I paid for his luxury wedding. I treated him like a king because I wanted to believe he was destined for greatness. And while I was handing him the world on a silver platter, I completely ignored you. He finally looked up, meeting my eyes with raw, devastating honesty. I watched you work yourself to the bone, Sydney. I watched you exhaust yourself working night shifts just to pay for your law school textbooks. I told you that you needed to learn the value of hard work, but the truth is, I was just too blinded by my obsession with Bradley to see your brilliance. I treated you like a second-class citizen in your own family. And in the end, the son I gave everything to stepped over my bleeding body for a paycheck, and the daughter I pushed away is the one who rushed in to save my life. I am so deeply, deeply sorry. I know I cannot erase the past, but I beg you to forgive me. I looked at the man lying in the hospital bed. For years I had craved his validation. I had spent my early 20s desperate for just a fraction of the approval he showered on my brother. But as I sat there holding his hand, I realized I did not need his validation anymore. I had built my own worth. I forgive you, Dad, I said gently, and I meant every single word. I am not going to pretend the past did not hurt. It did. But holding on to that anger is not going to serve me anymore. You made mistakes, but you are still my father. You are safe now, and we are going to move forward from here. No more secrets, no more golden children, just the truth. He brought my hand to his lips and kissed my knuckles, weeping with pure gratitude. We sat there together as the morning sunlight flooded the hospital room, washing away the last lingering shadows of the nightmare we had just survived. When I finally walked out of the hospital later that afternoon, I took a deep breath of the crisp, clean Seattle air. The journey from being the overlooked, struggling scapegoat to the district attorney of King County had been long and exhausting. It was a path paved with rejection, late nights, and profound loneliness. But standing on those hospital steps, I realized the most valuable lesson of my entire life. When toxic people label you as a failure, when they underestimate your intelligence and try to cast you out into the cold, your first instinct is often to scream. You want to fight back, to throw tantrums, to demand that they see your worth. But screaming only gives them the reaction they crave. The best revenge is never loud. The sweetest revenge is building unshakable, terrifying power in absolute silence. It is letting the toxic people in your life comfortably underestimate you. It is letting them dig their own graves with their greed and their arrogance. And then when they finally cross the line, you do not need to raise your voice. You simply step out of the shadows and let the full crushing weight of the law and reality destroy their illusions. Bradley and Monique thought they were the untouchable elites of the family. They thought they could steal assault and manipulate their way to a luxury lifestyle. They never saw me coming until the handcuffs were already locked around their wrists. I built my empire in silence, and now I get to live the rest of my life in peace, knowing that my power is entirely my own. Have you ever had to build your success in silence while toxic family members underestimated you? How did you handle the moment they finally realized your true worth? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this journey resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about resilience, boundaries, and claiming your own power. Remember, your worth is never determined by those who are too blind to see it. Stay strong and keep building your empire. Thank you for listening. The most profound lesson from this story is that true power never requires raising your voice. When facing toxic family members who constantly underestimate you, the natural instinct is to scream and fight back. However, reacting emotionally only gives them the control they desperately crave. Instead, the ultimate revenge is building your success in absolute silence. By focusing on personal growth and establishing unshakable boundaries, you become an unstoppable force. When the time finally comes, your undeniable reality will easily crush their illusions. How do you handle your own toxic relatives? Please let me know in the comments down below.